everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're finally going to be talking about We Need to Talk About Kevin. This is a book I very much enjoyed. It is also not a book for the faint of heart because it is very dramatic. It is about a school shooter, and it's from the perspective of the mother looking over the life of Kevin, looking over the life of her marriage, and trying to examine how things got to where they got. It's a very interesting book, but it's definitely not a book that I think everybody can read because of the subject matter, just because I don't think a lot of people really want to read about this. Eva is also a very difficult character herself. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lamwai, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creative genius. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit it to the Fresh Meat feature, just your first chapter and your cover, that chapter will be read here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work, because the audience is out there. I might not be the audience, but it deserves to be found by the people who are going to like what you do. If you end up sending your book to me wanting a book review, just prepare yourselves for the eventuality of when it comes out. If I do not, if it's just not my tea. You might be surprised at the number of times I do an indie book and then I get an email from the author or the author's fans telling me I'm stupid. But I digress. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books, including the local library upon request. My newest novel, Body More Zero, featuring these two gentlemen here, comes out in October, and the arc will be out soon. Guys, I promise. The epilogue is in there now. It's going to be a ride. It's also going to be a ride for me to see just how people respond to these guys, because I'm obviously very fond of them, but I don't expect strangers to be very fond of them. So it's going to be a ride for sure to see what the reader response is to them, the broad reader response, I should say. But I love them. I'm kind of mourning the fact that I'm not working on a book that is as lovely as them, and I have to remind myself as I'm working on my new books that I suffered when writing with these guys as well. So it's just part of the cycle. With that said, let's jump into the pre-comments, and then we'll get into the book review, the book discussion. I am so excited to share this. So the book is We Need to Talk About Kevin by Lionel Shriver. Now, I discovered this book via the movie. I never saw the movie. I still haven't seen the movie, but I heard about the concept of the movie, and then I went to look for the book because I always prefer the books over the movies because you get much more context and you get much more of the author's original vision. Pretty much every time I've watched a movie version of a book, it often perverts the author's intent or the style of the author, and it often removes the general or actual themes of the novel in order to make it more sensational for movies. I hated the American Psycho movie. It completely removed the commentary that was in the American Psycho book. I don't want to say that all movies that are from books or video games are terrible. I'm just saying that I heard about this, and if I wanted to have the better experience, I knew that I needed to read the book, and boy, did I. This was an instant. I wasn't even done reading this. I was like 30% into it maybe. And the way that it was written, I was like, I like this. I'm getting a physical copy of it. So this is now on my bookshelf as well, because I really like how this is written. One thing that you need to know about the way this is written is it's actually written as a series of letters to somebody named Franklin, who is Ava's husband. This is also written a year and a half after the tragedy, so everything has already happened with Kevin, and what you're doing is you're going back in time to kind of walk through life, and you're also getting Eva's thoughts about her life, her marriage, the relationships in hindsight. So remember that this is all also in hindsight. Every evaluation, every emotion, it's all with the perspective of what's also happened to her being put into the response. I also want to posit the question to you guys. This is also a really relevant book based on some of the community tab questions that I have, and I'm going to get into something like that in a second, where it's like, when is somebody responsible for what they do? I'm going to have a discussion at the end of the video that gets more into that. But I wanted to ask you, do you believe that your actions matter in influencing others? Do you believe that there is any responsibility that you hold on the effect that you have to others and what your actions or the way you treat people causes other people to do? Or is it entirely on the other people? I should say what my bias is straight up. It's all over everything. And I even have a section of Body More Zero that I read for the audiobook yesterday that's just like so specifically this that I can't even hide what my bias is. So I'm just going to be straightforward. One of the main things that I write about is why do people do what they do? And you get even more of that in Body More Zero when you see Casey and Ralph and who they are and how they live and how they justify themselves. But you kind of got to piecemeal that together from the things that you are given. It's not just Body More though. Pretty much all of my writing is presenting certain kinds of ugly situations, certain kinds of people. Dead End Drive does it with all of the different people, and you're watching who these people are and how they justify themselves, and you get to know their backgrounds and you get to see why they do what they do. That's just one of the most interesting things to me. And it's often what I'm looking at in books is I'm watching what the character does, how they talk about themselves, how others talk about them, how they justify things, because I like looking at the justifications of the story, even if the characters don't really know that that's what they're doing. But I'm so obsessed with this that a tagline from one of my books is even, regret is the beginning, horror is the transformation, tragedy is the offspring. And this book also falls into that. While Body More says regret is the beginning, it's those things in your life that cause that resentment in you because you did something that you feel like you probably shouldn't have done, you regret having done. In this case, she regrets having had Kevin, period. And it builds into this thing that becomes horror. Horror is the transformation. So regret is the beginning. It's the treatment. It's the thing that causes the resentment and the negativity coming out of you, which turns into horror and the transformation of those around you, or even yourself, and the horror becomes a tragedy. After your transformation has happened, tragedy is bound to happen because horror, they're all connected. This is just all what I think. There's a moment in Body More Zero where Ralph is talking to Detective Grant about Casey and Casey's perspective and his background. And Ralph says, it can be hard when you feel like you don't have anyone and there's no future. You learn to live in the moment because that's really all there is. And Detective Grant says, tomorrow isn't a promise for anyone, though that can be easy to forget when you don't have much already. I see it a lot. Hopelessness, victimization, blaming everything around them on their circumstances. Don't get me wrong, in most cases, especially with kids, they're not to blame for where they are. But when they grow up being told that they'll never be more than what they are, they believe it. It becomes a sort of learned helplessness that leads to abuse. Tell someone that they'll never make it or they don't deserve better as a kid, and that'll become part of a nearly unshakable foundation that they've built themselves on. I don't think most people understand the power words have, especially on the young. You're not just inspiring, you're predicting the kind of life that you think that kid will have and encouraging the way that they make decisions, what they see. So obviously I have a very clear perspective on this already, and so you'll kind of see where my perspective is on this. The way that this book is written is it's going to kind of make you choose between nature or nurture, whether you think that Kevin was always evil, was just born evil and malicious, or if Ava had a bone to pick with him and always just looked at what he did as evil and then influenced his worldview by the way that she treated him. So that'll come up. The last thing that I want to say before we get into the story is the difference between psychology and law. And this is also very relevant because I had a community post asking about when is somebody responsible for their own actions. And often when you present different cases, people will rely on referring to the law, saying, well, the law will decide it. That's fine, but the law is not psychology. And so back when I was in graduate school for forensic psychology, one of the courses that I took was psychology and law. And we had a strong description of the difference between psychology and law and why you cannot talk about law at the same time you're talking about psychology, because they're actually adversaries to one another. So for a second, for the discussion, for the sake of talking about psychology and people and ethics and philosophy and the situation in general and people, I want us to put the law aside and try to focus on behaviors, because we're also not asking for anything to be done to Ava or anybody who inspires action on somebody else through the way that they're treated. It's more of a you need to put down the garters of what does it mean to take responsibility? Is that going to mean consequences for you? When in actuality, it just means what do you think is going to happen if you treat somebody a certain way and you continue to treat somebody a certain way? I see it so often where people go, well, I can abuse the crap out of that person because if they break, well, it's their choice to break. And then they just kind of wash their hands of the abuses or the way they treat other people because, well, I didn't shoot somebody. I didn't make them hang themselves. The only time that it seems to be okay to acknowledge the influence from exterior situations is one, when it is the only victim of the crime is the victim. So like grooming. If you tell a child from a young age to act a certain way, to behave a certain way, to give them a certain worldview that they just sponge so then they are sexually abused up into teenagers, then you're considered a groomer, right? We all acknowledge that that child was influenced by that adult to do those things, and that's not natural. However, if you end up with a situation like Kevin where there are external victims, then it's all, he knew exactly what he was doing. He understood the long-term things. And somehow we forget that this is a 15-year-old, where if it was a 15-year-old who was sexually abused and groomed as a child, that child would be seen as innocent. Now, we're not saying that he is not accountable for his actions, that he did not do these actions, but it has to do with the acknowledgement of the influences on the outside to the one that took action, right? Again, a lot of people like to deflect it into, well, if you say that these other people were responsible for that outcome, then what do you want done to them? We're not talking about law. Again, we're talking about regret is the beginning, horror, transformation, tragedy is the offspring. So if you get to a point when people are like, how did this happen? If you say, look at the behaviors, look at what this person thought, that is where it starts. Now, at least that's so let me give you the short description of the difference between law and psychology and why we can't talk about them at the same time. You can constitute the law and psychology as two different cultures. They're different in goals, methods, and styles of inquiry versus advocacy. The goal of psychology is to approximate the truth. Law is to approximate justice. The law is prescriptive via it tells people what to do. Psychology is descriptive via it tells why people do what they do. The law is high with uncertainty avoidance. It needs definitive decisions. It doesn't want to be uncertain in its choices or in its suppositions. Psychology is low on certainty avoidance. The law must come to a clear decision, black versus white, yes or no, while psychology has nuance and allows gray and questions and can have changing opinions as new things are discovered. The law grows by deciding cases, and psychology grows by applying the scientific method. Law and psychology differ in power distance as well. How much deference is given to authority? Law is high on power deference, and psychology is low on power deferences. The past is more important to the law than in psychology, as again, we're applying the scientific method, so as new information comes about, then you're going to shift things. Whereas the law goes, what was the last case that was like this? What is the precedence set on this, right? The law is adversarial in the United States, and psychology is inquisitive. It's curious. It's asking why this is happening. So with that said, they are two completely different things. They are actually the opposite end of the spectrum, and so you can't actually inquisitively ask why psychology, why in psychology somebody would do something if you're going to go to the law side, because the law side will just say it's evil, it's against the law, so throw the book at them. Okay, but that doesn't answer the question of why. So we have to put aside the law if we're going to talk about the behavior. So hopefully we can put that aside so that we can discuss the psychology of what we see here, the philosophy, the ethics, the morals, all of that. With that said, let's finally get into the book review. I love stuff like this. First, starting out, Eva is talking about going into some personal stories of something that happened to her, and so stories that used to be exotic are travel, but who knew that you could tell personal stories that were just as exotic? This will be something that she also mentions later at the end of the book, where she goes, a foreign country, a foreign place is sort of described as a place that makes you feel like you want to go home, and who could have thought that your own family is something that could make you feel like you were foreign and you wanted to go home? This is important because she is a travel writer from New York, so she travels all across the globe so that she can write travel magazines for other travelers going to other foreign countries. She assumes that Franklin, or the reader of the novel, is judging her for her exotic stories as trying too hard when you can easily find things to talk about where you live. So, why should she fly everywhere to get stories when she can find stuff in her back town? Quote, "Marvels from the mundane help to ratify your view that all my foreign travels were kind of cheating." This is something that she doesn't even want to talk about, but she feels like she has to and she can't let it go of. Quote, "It's still difficult for me to venture in public. You'd think in a country that so famously has no sense of history as the Europeans claim, that I might cash in on America's famous amnesia. No such luck. No one in this community shows any signs of forgetting after a year and 8 months to the day. She says the 7-Eleven has become a safe place where she can go and really not be hassled anymore by anyone, and she goes in there for basic groceries. As she picks up eggs, she sees a woman who still holds a grudge against her. That woman's gained a lot of weight, theoretically, after the tragedy and the possible divorce from, the resulting loss. She goes to the checkout counter and all of the eggs in the carton that she grabbed are broken. The attendant offers to get another carton for her, but Eva says that she doesn't need that and she'll just take the broken eggs and then leaves. Quote, "I'll take them all as they are. There's no better way to get people to cooperate in this country than by seeming a little unhinged." The girl in the checkout is 17, and Eva thinks of her son, Kevin, being this girl's age. Maybe she was one of his classmates. She could have been. She says her last name is uncommon, and Eva gets uncomfortable and then takes the card saying that she's the only one with that last name in New York and then leaves. She mentions that she's within driving distance of Kevin. Quote, "Besides, much as I crave anonymity, it's not that I want my neighbors to forget who I am. I want to. And that is not an opportunity any town affords. This is the one place in the world where the ramifications of my life are fully felt, and it's far less important to me to be liked these days than to be understood." She then describes her living situation, renting a kind of terrible, unfurnished place. Quote, "Everything here is precarious. The steep stairway to the second floor has no banister, spicing my ascent to bed with vertigo after 3 glasses of wine. The floors creak and the window's frame leaks, and there is an air about the place of fragility and underconfidence, as if any moment the entire structure might simply blink out like a bad idea. Swinging on rusty coat hangers from the live wire across the ceiling, the tiny halogen bulbs downstairs have a tendency to flicker, and their air tremulous light contributes to an on-again, off-again sensation that permeates my new life. Likewise, the inner of my soul telephone socket are disgorged. My uncertain connection to the outside world dangles by 2 poorly soldered wires, and it often cuts off. Though the landlord has promised me a proper stove, I really don't mind the hot plate whose on light doesn't work. The inside handle of the front door often comes off in my hand. So far, I've been able to work it back on again, but the stump of the lock shaft teases me with imitations of my mother, unable to leave the house." She keeps going on about the disarray and the discomfort of her house, and in a way, it kind of mirrors sort of how she is. So she's like, well, I don't have to live in this house, but I chose to live in this house because it represents me better. But I think it also really represents her state of mind, where she also says that she could be better, but this is what she's chosen to be. I think she also is telling herself that, where she thinks that she could be better, but she is a wreck and she doesn't know really what to do with herself, especially after having finished the novel. I don't think she knows how to process, which is understandable. She also states that it may be mirroring her mindset in some of the narrative. Quote, "Maybe this askew juvenile atmosphere helps to explain why yesterday in the presidential election I didn't vote. I simply forgot. Everything around me seems to take place so far away, and now, rather than pose a firm counterpoint to my dislocation, the country seems to have joined me in the realm of the surreal. The votes are tallied, but in this some Kafka tale, no one seems to know who won." I actually find it interesting to mention this specifically because, again, like I already started out by talking about Bodymore, but like neither of these guys vote. They've got more than enough stuff going on in their lives that they don't freaking care about the vote. And the same as with Joey, is she doesn't know who the frick is being voted in as mayor in Baltimore at any given time. She's not going out there to freaking vote for the general election. And it's like when your life is in disarray, you just freaking don't care. You've got other things to do than talk about the vote. And that's what it feels like for her. She discusses how, at first, food revolted her, then after a couple of months, she started feeling ravenous, but ignored the hunger until she realized that no one cared if she looked cadaverously skinny. And so she started eating more regularly, and that includes cooking all of the cracked eggs that night and eating them since they're all cracked and they would have gone bad if she didn't eat them sooner. She talks about the newspaper, describing her as emotionless in the trial, defiant-looking in some cases, though she says that she was just trying not to cry. She's not going near the police stations if she doesn't have to. She talks about their original house being vandalized. How could she not have heard, but for all the pills that she took to sleep? She cleaned the paint off of her house herself to make the neighbors watch so that they wouldn't think that she was hiring another person to clean up her mess again, just like she had hired a lawyer to clean up after Kevin. She sold the property and thought that it would have been harder to sell based on its history. The person who bought it was actually excited, and his son gets the room that belonged to Eva's son, Kevin. Quote, "That's right, Kevin. Wild, huh? My kid Lawrence has his room. Tried one on the other night, too. Said that he had to stay up with me to watch Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, because his room was haunted by Kevin Ketchup. Had to disappoint the kid. Sorry, I said. Kevin Ketchup can't no way be haunting your room when that worthless little bastard's all too alive and well in the kiddie prison upstate. Up to me, man, that scumbag would have got the chair." No, it wasn't quite as good as Columbine. What was it? 10, honey? 9? Right, 7 kids, 2 adults. The teacher he whacked was like this brat's big champion or something too, and I don't know about blaming videos, rock music. We grew up with rock music, didn't we? None of us went on some killing frenzy at our high school. Or take Lawrence. That little guy likes blood and guts on TV, and no matter how tragic, he doesn't flinch. But his rabbit got run over, he cried for a week. They know the difference. We're raising him to know what's right. Maybe it seems unfair, but you really gotta wonder about the parents. This is where I want to ask you, do you think that actions are nature or nurture? When do you think a person is reasonably responsible for their actions and choices, and when do you think it matters where the influences come in? Are there differences in ages, and is there a point that parents should be assumed guilty of negligence for the choices of their children? I've got my own opinions on this. I'm not going to fight anybody on it. I already know that I am very firmly placed in what I personally believe. Maybe I will be surprised by perspectives that I've never heard before that could convince me to more information, but I know where I stand, and I'm not going to argue with anybody on anything. I just want to see where people's perspectives lie in comparison to my own. Eva then gets into talking about what if Kevin was never born. She knows that it's morbid to think about, but still, she wants to think about the life that she could have had if he had never been born. The murders had never happened, and so she goes all the way back to 1982 when they first considered conceiving. She talks about how on vacation things were going too well, that they got along too well, her and Franklin, and that they were just mostly fine. Business was good, and she had money, and she didn't know what to do with all of the money and resources and success she had. Quote, "Everything seems so sorted out," I lamented. "Winging a prayer has taken off so that only the things that could really happen to me professionally is for the company to go belly up. I could always make more money, but I'm a thrift shop junkie, Franklin, and I don't know what to do with it. Money bores me, and it's starting to change the way that we live in a way that I'm not totally comfortable with. Plenty of people don't have kids because they can't afford one. For me, it would be a relief to find something of consequence to spend it on. I'm not of consequence. You don't want enough. New jump rope? $10. Well, at least a kid would answer the big question. I could be perverse too. What big question? You know, you said lightly and drew out with an MC drawl. The old existential dilemma. I did not put my finger on why, but your big question left me unmoved. I far preferred my turn of the page. I could always trapeze off to a new country. I could always traipse off to a new country. Any left? You go through countries the way most folks go through socks. Russia, I noted, but I'm not for once threatening to ransom my life to Airflot, because lately everywhere seems kind of the same. Countries all have different foods, but they all have food. You know what I mean? What do you call that? Right. Cadswallop. See, you'd a habit back then of pretending to have no idea what I was talking about if what I was getting at was all complicated or subtle. Later, this playing dumb strategy, which began as gentle teasing, warped into dark incapacity to grasp what I was getting at, not because it was obtuse, but because it was all too clear that you didn't want it to be so. Eva then mentions that she realizes part of wanting kids was driven by wanting more people to love and more love for herself. Quote, "Looking back, maybe my saying that I wanted more story was all the way of alluding to the fact that I wanted someone else to love. We never said such things outright. We were too shy, and I was nervous of ever intimating that you weren't enough for me. In fact, now that we are parted, I wish that I had overcome my own bashfulness and had told you more often how falling in love with you was the most astonishing thing that had ever happened to me. Not just the falling either, the trite and finite part, but being in love. Then it moves to her talking about her and her husband spending time with friends, talking to their parents, even though they're in their mid-30s. And isn't it stupid that they're talking about their parents like this? And he mocks her for having ridiculous stories from abroad to talk about, because who cares about the customs and weird obsessions in other countries? She says that maybe this is also a good reason to have kids. Quote, "Don't be silly," I said. "I'm like everyone else. I love to talk about other people. Not peoples. People I know, people close to me, people who drive me crazy. But I feel as if I'm using my family up. My father was killed before I was born. One brother and one mom make for pretty slim pickings. Honestly, Franklin, maybe you should have a kid just to have something else to talk about." "Now that," you clanged the spinach pan in the sink, "is frivolous." I stayed your hand. "It's not. What we talk about is what we think about, is what our lives are about. I'm not sure that I want to spend mine looking over my shoulder at generations whose lineage I'm personally helping to truncate. There's something nihilistic about not having children, Franklin, as if you don't believe in the whole human thing. If everyone followed our lead, the species would disappear in 100 years. Get out," you jeered. "Nobody has kids to perpetuate the species. Maybe not consciously, but it's only been since about 1960 that we've been able to decide without joining a nunnery. Besides, after nights like this, there might be a poetic justice in having grown kids talking for hours to their friends about me." She then closes this section by saying that she couldn't have imagined her desire for a child could end up being the thing that also lost her the love of her life. Which, despite the kind of person that Eva comes off as in this book, despite how she judges him, and we'll get into some of that later, she does seem to actually care about him. And I think if you look at some of the later bits, she's having a very difficult time processing everything that happened with her and her family and her son. And I think even though this book doesn't say that that's what it is, because, it's a sensitive situation, is Kevin is the only family that she really has left. And it's her connection to her husband as well. And I think that she does realize to some extent, what she did wrong, how she failed, how distant she was. But I think that both her and Kevin are almost too far gone at the moment to really understand each other. Not that they can't reconcile if they both want to reconcile, but it will be difficult. She's then writing about the difficulty with the Florida voting count, and this has to do with Bush versus Gore. Like, I was reading this and going, oh, great. This sounds like all of the same issues we've had with voting for like the last freaking decade that I've been voting, and it's like, quote, "Only a country that feels invulnerable can afford political turmoil as entertainment," which fair observation, as she uses this to lead into not knowing turmoil and not being able to figure out what would happen, but it is here after Kevin. He was born in 1984, and she should have taken that as an omen like the others, because 1984, the book. It was in 1999 that something bad happened. Quote, "Since I wrote last, I've been rooting around in my mental attic for my original reservations about motherhood. I do recall a tumult of fears, though all the wrong ones. Had I catalogued the downsides of parenthood, son might turn out killer would never have turned up on the list. Rather, it might have looked something like this. 1. Hassle. 2. Less time for just the two of us. Try no time for just the two of us. 3. Other people. PTA meetings, ballet teachers, the kids' insufferable friends and their insufferable parents. 4. Turning into a cow. I was slight and preferred to stay that way. My sister-in-law had developed bulging varicose veins in her legs during pregnancy that never retreated, and the prospect of calves branched in blue trees roots mortified me more than I could say. So I did say, I am vain, or once was, and one of my vanities was feign that I was not. 5. Unnatural altruism, being forced to make decisions in accordance to what was best for someone else. I am a pig. 6. Curtailment of my traveling. Note curtailment, not conclusion. 7. Demented boredom. I found small children brutally dull. I did, even on the outset, admit this to myself. 8. Worthless social life. I had never had a decent conversation with a friend's 5-year-old in the room. 9. Social demotion. I was a respected entrepreneur. Once I had a toddler in tow, every man I knew, every woman too, which is depressing, would take me less seriously. 10. Paying the piper. Parenthood repays a debt. But who wants to pay a debt that she can escape? Apparently, the childless get away with something sneaky. Besides, what good is repaying a debt to the wrong party? Only the most warped mother could feel rewarded for her troubles by the fact that at last her daughter's life is hideous too. Which actually, you see a lot of this play out in the way that she approaches Kevin, so She knew herself well, okay? She knew herself well to know what she wouldn't like, but she didn't know herself well enough to just decide not to have a child. She says her list is all one of selfishness, but practical reasons to not have a child that anyone could really come up with. And considering the modern era, there is no use for kids, especially since they don't take care of you when they're older. It's amazing that anyone is having kids nowadays. Her son Kevin came along when she was 37, and she wondered if having him at that time did somehow amplify him into the flaws of Shakespearean proportions. She talks about how her traveling and travel guide writing got in the way of her relationship with her husband, and it frustrated him, and how she had to mix relationship with traveling in order to make them both happy. She talks about the circus around the election again. People are crazy. Then she goes into saying that she's thinking about Franklin as she travels, but also the kind of hippie intellectual stereotype she used to joke about having as her exes. A relationship is doomed when a woman calls a man sweet, she says. And then she says what he was, describing Franklin in a very American way. He was a patriot who loved his country and did barely any traveling, but knew that America was where he wanted to be. He was sincere and strong and hopeful and unlike anyone else that she ever knew. Quote, irony. I have thought about you and irony. It always got your back up when my friends from Europe would come through and dismiss our countrymen as having no sense of irony. Yet, ironically, in the latter 20th century, irony was huge in the U.S., painfully so. In fact, I was so sick of it, though I didn't realize that until we met. Coming into the 80s, everyone was retro, and there was an undercurrent of snideness, a distancing in all of those 50s diners with chrome stools and oversized root beer floats. Irony means at once having and not having. Irony involves a prissy dabbling, a disavowal. We had friends whose apartments were completely tricked out in sardonic quiche piccininny dolls, framed advertisements for Kellogg's cornflakes from the 20s. Look at the Bowfuls go, who owned nothing that wasn't a joke. You wouldn't live that way. Oh, to have no sense of irony was supposedly to not know what it was, to be a moron, to have no sense of humor. You knew what it was. You laughed a little at the lamp-bearing cast-iron black jockey that Belmont picked up for their hearth to be polite. You got the joke. You just didn't think that it was funny, really, and in your own life you wanted objects that were truly beautiful and not just a laugh. Such a bright man. You were sincere by design and not merely by nature. American by personal fiat, and you would embrace all that was good in that. Is it called naive when you are naive on purpose? You would go on. He would also encourage her to go and see different parts of America when instead she would scoff at the idea to then fly off to other countries. He told her that if she was born in any other country, then America would be her top bucket list location, because no one can resist America, and we live in the greatest time to be alive, in the greatest empire. Even if it falls, at least you got to live in that time to experience it. And he brought it up that if you can't raise kids in the United States, then why would you be able to raise them freaking anywhere else? Because the United States is at the top of the game. Eva believes that's true, and since you can't raise a good child here, then it may not be possible to raise a good child anywhere else, she says. She talks about how she dutifully went to visit her son in prison during the trial, and people thought that she was performing to not get negligence charges, but even after no one was looking, she continued to see her son, and he seems surprised that she even still visits. Quote, and in those first few visits, he seemed to regard my very presence as an accusation, so before I said a single word, he'd get angry. It didn't seem sensible that he should be the one to be mad at me. But in the same vein, when a car nearly sideswipes me in a crosswalk, I've noticed that the driver is frequently furious, shouting, gesticulating, cursing at me, whom he nearly ran over, and who had undisputed right of way. This is a dynamic particular to encounters with male drivers, who seem to grow all the more indignant the more completely they are in the wrong. I think the emotional reasoning is, if you can call it that, is transitive. You make me feel bad. Feeling bad makes me mad. Ergo, you make me mad. If I had the presence back then to seize on the first part of that proof, I might have glimpsed in Kevin's instantaneous dungeon a glimmer of hope. But at the time, his fury simply mystified me. It seemed so unfair. Women tend more towards chagrin, not only in traffic. So I blamed me, and he blamed me, and I felt ganged up on. Her visits with Kevin are hard. He's not usually talkative. He's angry. It's taken a while for him to even start talking to her regularly, and mostly it's because Eva can now somewhat keep up with him, making dark jokes to him, understanding the way that he talks. The way that she converses with him shows a woman who knows him better than he probably thinks that she does, because he's so angry and hates her. But where their relationship is, he talks to her about what is happening. Quote, he said, Tell you what, I'm fucking tired of telling that same fucking story. From which I could infer that, rather, his fellow inmates were tired of hearing it. Over a year and a half is a long time for teenagers, and Kevin is already yesterday's news. He's getting old enough to appreciate, too, that one of the differences between a perp, as they say in cop shows, and your average newspaper reader is that onlookers are allowed the luxury of getting fucking tired of the same fucking story, and are free to move on. Culprits are stuck in what must be a tyrannical rehearsal of the same old tale. Kevin will be climbing the stairs to the aerobic conditioning alcove at the Gladstone High School gym for the rest of his life. So he is resentful, and I don't blame him for being bored with his own atrocity already, or for envying others their capacity to abandon it. Which, fair. And it's not even just this. It's like, I see it often, and I've kind of talked about it before in previous videos if you've been around the channel, is that a lot of people like to hold you to the worst moment of your life. And maybe you act out. And I'm not talking about stuff like this. I'm not talking about actual crime. I'm talking about, like, maybe you hit the lowest low in your personal lives and you end up hurting somebody, or you abandon something, and then that's all that you are ever remembered for or by. Maybe you have that one person in your life that, like, if you have a disagreement, then they go, well, you did this to me. And you go, when was the last time I did that to you? And they go, well, I don't know, but you did it once. And they always hold you to that thing. And it's just like, you can never be allowed to get better. It's also one of those things that comes up with the modern version of apology, which doesn't exist, because you can apologize to the mob, and they will always go back to, well, you still did this thing, so we're never going to forgive you. Like, forgiveness doesn't exist in some cases. And you're just forced to be your worst self ad nauseum, because it's now become a control mechanism on certain people if you let it be, instead of actually having conversations with people and meeting people and trying to create something better. Kevin is also now jealous of this 13-year-old who was recently admitted because everyone's paying attention to that kid instead of him. Eva's impressed that they actually spent the entire visit talking, and when it's time to go, she says goodbye. Quote, once I was no longer fussing with my coat, he said, you may be fooling the neighbors and the guards and Jesus and your gaga mother with those goody-goody visits of yours, but you're not fooling me. Keep it up if you want a gold star, but you're not dragging your ass back here on my account. Then he added, because I hate you. I know that children say this all the time in fits. I hate you, I hate you. Eyes squeezed with tears, but Kevin is approaching 18 and his delivery is flat. I had some idea of what I was supposed to say back. Now I know that you don't mean that, when I knew that he did. Or I love you anyway, young man, like it or not. But I had the inkling that it was following just these pat scripts that had helped to land me in the garish overseated room that smelled like a bus toilet on the otherwise lovely, unusually clement December afternoon. So I said instead, in the same informational tone, I often hate you too, Kevin. And then turned heel. Actually, that's really interesting to look at in retrospect, because one of the things that we'll see later is that Kevin didn't see anybody, his mother or his dad, interacting with him earnestly. He saw his mother always being adversarial to him and or faking with him, and she even says that she fakes emotions with him all the time, specifically after he covers an incident for her, and then she's like, oh, he's gonna blackmail me with that now. This 5-year-old is gonna blackmail me, and he is going to hold it over my head, and now I have to kiss his ass. So she was faking emotions with him. She was putting on a role, and she describes that as what she did for him as well in multiple places, where she's not being his mother. She's not actually his mother. She's putting on the role of a mother. And then she also, Eva, criticizes Franklin for trying to make Kevin fit into the certain idea of what their relationship should be like, and that their interactions were also shallow and placid. So it's actually very interesting here that she's finally like, look, I'm going to talk to you at your level. I'm going to be honest with you. I hate you too sometimes. Probably a lot. I think actually looking through the interactions and where it starts and watching their relationship grow as they actually are able to start talking, and then where this ends makes the ending, I think, hit more. I always love re-going through these books and then seeing in retrospect once I finish. This entire scene with Kevin, the mood, the sharp writing is so well done. I just had to mention it while I was reading it. She speaks on how her traveling mindset was childish and her desire to have a husband that was like the TV shows that she watched. She says Franklin restored the idea of what a home was, and Kevin took it away, made her feel like a foreigner in her own country. Neighbors look suspiciously at her like she's an illegal immigrant, and maybe that's part of the reason that she keeps up with her visits to the correctional facility, because her and Kevin have a shared shared past, a shared understanding, and a shared culture where no one else is welcome or familiar. It gives her a place of home, even though it's also very sharp. Eva talks about the night when her husband was late getting home and she worried. And her mother called asking her for attention, for help, for a conversation or something. And instead of being kind to her mother, she just hung up because she didn't have any patience for it. Her mother went through this sort of thing for weeks at a time when her husband was deployed, and only to receive a letter saying that the husband was dead. So she was used to something similar that Eva was going through, though I don't think that there was ever a threat to Franklin's life for where he was. He was just coming home late. Eventually, Franklin calls after midnight saying that the car broke down and he walked to where he could get to a phone and he'll be home as soon as possible. Relief floods Eva and she goes back to petty worries until he gets home. It doesn't really matter that he's tired. Eva is so desperate to have a baby in her because it's something that she feels like needs to happen right now for them. And she wanted something left behind between them that wasn't just socks, that wasn't just nothing nonsense. She wanted something meaningful for them to leave behind. There is a little bit of a struggle getting pregnant at first, and it makes Eva look at her body differently. All of the things that make her attractive are functions of procreation, she says. The sex isn't about feeling good anymore. It has a purpose, and the purpose spits up and uses her body and replaces her. Eva then believes that she may be pregnant and goes to the doctor, telling her husband that he can stay behind because it's not like she's being checked for cancer. It's like whatever. She goes back between getting hot and cold on the idea of this life-changing event. She finds out that she is in fact pregnant and she goes cold immediately, suddenly feeling like her body no longer belongs to her and everything is about the two of them. She has now lost control. Because she is pregnant, she also can't celebrate it with alcohol with her husband, and she starts resenting this child immediately. Quote, a petty one, but most resentments are, and one that for its smallness I felt obliged to repress. For that matter, this is the nature of resentment, the objections that we cannot express. It is the silence more than the complaint itself that makes the emotion so toxic. Like poison, the body won't pee away. Hence, hard as I tried to be a grown-up about the cranberry juice chosen carefully for its resemblance to a young Beaujolais, deep down inside I was a brat. While you came up with names for boys, I racked my brain for what all of this, the diapers, the sleepless nights, the rides to soccer practice, I was meant to be looking forward to. Then, you were always captivated by self-sacrifice. However admirable, your eagerness to give your life over to another person may have been due to some measure to the fact that when your life was wholly in your lap, you didn't know what to do with it. Self-sacrifice was an easy way out. I know that sounds unkind, but I do believe that this desperation of yours to rid yourself of, if that is not too abstract, burdened your son hugely. She then goes to her first family dinner, freaks out about it, talking baby names in the future, finding a good school, the way that she'll be required to look after her body. All of it feels more like a drag than something to be excited for. Kevin's not even born yet, and there's already this competitive resentment between what she wants and what she thinks she has to do for the baby and what the baby is stopping her from doing. Eva thinks about how much she doesn't want this. Franklin does want it, and Franklin is already eager to give up so much of his life for this child, and Eva is not. Quote, with no bottle over which to linger, we went to bed on the early side. You were nervous about whether you were supposed to have sex, if it would hurt the baby, and I grew a little exasperated. I was already victimized like some princess by an organism the size of a pea. Me, I really wanted to have sex for the first time in weeks, since we could finally fuck because we wanted to get laid and not to do our bit for the race. You acquiesced, but you were depressingly tender. Though I expected my ambivalence would evanesce, this conflicted sensation grew only sharper and therefore more secret. At last I should come clean. I think the ambivalence didn't go away because it wasn't what it seemed. It was not true that I was ambivalent about motherhood. You wanted to have a child. On balance, I did not. Added together, that seemed like ambivalence. But though we were a superlative couple, we were not the same person. Eva is then visiting with Kevin, where he says, you never wanted to have me, did you? And Eva is very honest with him, if you can call it that, saying that, quote, before being impounded like a pet that bites, Kevin wasn't given to asking me about myself, and I actually took the question as promising. Oh, he reached for it in dull restiveness, pacing his cage, but there's something to be said for being bored out of your mind. He must have previously recognized that I had a life in order to go about ruining it with such a sense of purpose. But now he had further appreciated that I had had volition. I had chosen to have a child and had harbored other aspirations that his arrival might have thwarted. This intuition was at such odds with the therapist's diagnosis of empathic deficiency that I felt he deserved an honest reply. "I thought you did," I said, "and your father, he wanted you desperately." I looked away. Kevin's expression of sleepy sarcasm was immediate. "Perhaps I shouldn't have cited, of all things, your desperation. Me, I loved your longing. I had personally profited from your insatiable loneliness, but children must find such hunger disquieting." And Kevin would routinely translate disquiet into contempt. "You thought he did," I said. "You changed your mind." "I thought I needed a change. But no one needs a change for the worse." I'd anticipated mopping up vomit, baking Christmas cookies. I couldn't have expected. Kevin's look dared me. "I couldn't have expected that simply forming an attachment to you," I phrased it diplomatically as I knew how, "would be so much work. I took a breath, I thought that part came for free." "Free!" he jeered. "Waking up every morning isn't free." "Not anymore," I conceded dolefully. Kevin's and my experience of day-to-day life had converged. Time hangs off me like molting skin. "Ever occur to you that maybe I didn't want to have you?" Eva's sure that Kevin's getting her to throw things out there to hurt him, like someone will pinch themselves to see if they feel anything, and so he deflates. It's not because she's hurt him, but because he's disappointed that he feels nothing from her response. Eva then switches to talking about how Americans specifically view pregnancy and really how she has viewed it herself, because she really can't make sense of the dread about having a child and wonders if it's all because of her idea of a free life was taken away from her because she's afraid of what she has to give up in order to have the child, or if it's in retrospect, she's framing this pregnancy now this way because it turned out bad. We don't know because it's written in post, so we don't know what she actually felt at the time. We just see her looking back and saying, "This is how I feel now." Quote, "Did you know that Americans stare at pregnant women? In the low birth rate first world, gestation is a novelty. In the days of TNA, on every newsstand, real pornography, conjuring intrusively intimate visions of spread hams, incontingent seepage, that eely umbilical slither. Casting my own eyes down Fifth Avenue as my belly swelled, I would register with incredulity. Every one of these people came from a woman's cunt. In my head, I used the crudest word that I could to bring home the point. Like the purpose of breasts, it's one of those glaring facts that we tend to suppress. You think it's too strong. I don't. Ever notice how many films portray pregnancy as infestation, as colonization by stealth? Rosemary's Baby was just the beginning. In Alien, a foul extraterrestrial claws its way out of John Hurt's belly. In Mimic, a woman gives birth to a two-headed maggot. Later, the X-Files turned to bug-eyed aliens bursting gorily from a human midsection into a running theme. In horror and sci-fi, the host is consumed or rent reduced to a husk or residue so that some nightmare creature may survive that hell. I'm sorry, but I don't make these movies up, and any woman whose teeth have rotted, whose bones have thinned, whose skin is stretched knows the humbling price of the 9-month freeloader. Those nature films of female salmon battling upstream to lay their eggs only to disintegrate, eyes filming, scales dropping, made me mad. The whole time I was pregnant with Kevin, I was battling the idea of Kevin, the notion that I had demoted myself from driver to vehicle, from householder to house. She's talking about arguing with Franklin over what to name the child. They both have such different ideas, with Franklin wanting to name the child something fairly normal and Eva going off the deep end with strange names. She says that they might be strange to Franklin, but they are normal to her, and he says he doesn't have to sound like he's mine. And Franklin's like, with names like those, he doesn't even sound like he's mine. Eva wanted Kevin to have her last name, not her husband's, and not hyphenated. They argue about the last name thing, especially with Eva saying that women are at a bigger disadvantage and that her family line and ethnicity is more traumatized, so her name deserves to be passed down more than the Plaskett name. And she mocks her husband's last name, saying that it's garbage. When it heats up, she says that she loves his last name just so long as it's his. She didn't take his last name because she wanted to keep hers. Kevin is the proposed name if it's a boy, then Kevin would get his mother's family name if it's a boy, and if a girl was born, then that would get the the husband's last name, and the husband would get to name the child. Eva doesn't like this, tries to argue then that, okay, I will name the boy Kevin if it's a boy, and you can name it if it's a girl, and it can have your last name if it's a girl, and it can have my last name if it's a boy. And she's like, you're only saying that because you don't like women and women have less value. And Franklin's like, oh my gosh, okay, if it's a girl, it can have my last name. If it's a boy, it can have your last name. If it's a boy, it's being named Kevin, though. And she agrees to this. Quote, like so many of our neighbors who latched onto tragedies to stand out from the crowd, slavery, incest, a suicide, I had exaggerated the ethnic chip on my shoulder for effect. I've learned since that tragedy is not to be hoarded. Only the untouched, the well-fed, the contented could possibly covet suffering like a designer jacket. I'd readily donate my story to the Salvation Army so that some other frump in need of color could wear it away. The name? I think I just wanted to make a baby mine. I couldn't shake the sensation of having been appropriated. Even when I got the sonogram and Dr. Reinstein drew his fingers around the shifting mass on the monitor, I thought, who is that? Though right under my skin, swimming in another world, the form seemed far away. And did the fetus have feelings? I had no way of anticipating that I would still be asking that question about Kevin when he was 15. That's a big thing. So much of this is about controlling and feeling foreign and separated from Kevin since the very beginning. And you wonder, did this affect Kevin? Did Kevin get those feelings while he was in gestation? If this is how she felt the entire time, how much was she actually there for her son as he was growing up? We will find out. How much did she feel like she didn't care about him and developed that way, and so then he didn't care? Frustrated, there's no purpose, so then he ended up thinking there was no purpose. Eva mentions how she likes the company of men over the company of women, but has never been too sure about boys or what boys talk about. And she goes on about how a group of boys had ganged up on her, bullied her, pulled her pants down when they ganged up on her, and then ran off. And she thinks that she is going to be raising one of those in her house, and how it's being a boy that just made it more Franklin's than hers, which is kind of ironic because Kevin is actually very much like his mother. She says that she doesn't feel like Franklin even cares and that she's one of his possessions, and she thinks that if she leaves, all Franklin sees is someone running off with something precious, not a person. She is recklessly dancing around the apartment at 7 months pregnant, almost like she wants something to happen to the baby, and Franklin comes in and is super controlling, which is also interesting. He's like, don't be dancing around like that. It's interesting how controlling and fearful Franklin was for Kevin's, well-being, and then that kind of translated a little bit into how Eva is so controlling of also Kevin and trying to get him to be what he wants her, what she wants him to be. When he says that she needs to calm down and stop doing all that because it's dangerous, she's like, people used to do a lot of things while pregnant, bro. In the old days, there was a lot going on. And Franklin says, quote, in the olden days, infant and maternal mortality were sky high. What do you care about maternal mortality? So long as they scoop the kid out of my lifeless body, as while its heart is still beating, you'll be happy as a clam. That's a hideous thing to say. I'm in the mood to be hideous. Though before Papa Doc come home, I was in a great mood. 2 more months. Is it that big a difference to take it easy for the well-being of our whole other person? Boy, was I already sick of being the well-being of the whole other person held over my head. My well-being apparently now counts for beans. This is where the crack in the relationship really comes over Kevin. There are other things that are here, but this is a whole big deal for Franklin, and in turn, Eva, because he doesn't want to hear her say that she doesn't care about her son. And so now Eva doesn't feel like she can talk to her husband. Quote, stop feeling sorry for yourself, Eva. I thought the whole idea of becoming a parent was to grow up. If I'd realized that what it meant to you, affecting some phony killjoy adulthood, I'd have reconsidered the whole business. Don't you ever say that, you said, your face beat red. It's too late for second thoughts. Never ever tell me that you regret your own kid. That's when I started to cry. When I had shared with you my most sordid sexual fantasies and such disturbing volition of heterosexual norms that, without the assistance of your own disgraceful mental smut shared in return, I'm too embarrassed to mention them here. Since when was there anything that one of us was never, ever to say? Eva is then at the office, and she's tired of listening to people argue about politics. Now Florida is a race issue, and Democrats are throwing around the word Jim Crow. Conservatives and liberals are arguing over the Supreme Court decision. Conservatives are just racist on their side. Liberals are on behalf of truth, justice, and humanity. And Eva says that she doesn't even feel like she can talk about this anymore because she gave up on defending humanity a long time ago. Quote, Blame confers an awesome power, and it's simplifying not only to onlookers and victims, but to culprits most of all. It imposes order on slag. Blame conveys clear lessons in which others may take comfort, if only she hadn't, and by implication makes tragedy avoidable. There may even be a fragile peace to be found in the assumption of total responsibility, and I see that calm in Kevin on occasion. It is an aspect that his keepers confuse as remorsefulness. She says that the blame is going to be thrown at her one way or another for what Kevin did, and she tries to feel something about it, but she can't. She tries to feel a way about normal things and the people that she doesn't see anymore, the children of her friends, but she doesn't feel anything for anybody. And she has a hard time empathizing with others in general. They just aren't her, and they don't have her concerns, they don't have her concerns. They don't understand her concerns in any way, and it feels like she believes that since they can't understand her at all, then why should she bother trying to understand any of them at all? She's just judging her friends and having petty issues. Quote, "But it may not be fair to call it a character flaw that someone's life has always gone well with minimum impedance. Moreover, she was a restless woman and, like my Democratic co-workers, given to indignation by nature. Previous to Thursday, she had been accustomed to venting this quantity, which would otherwise build up in her at combustible levels, on campaigns to have the town council put in a pedestrian crossing or to ban homeless shelters from Gladstone. Consequently, the denial of funds for such a crossing or the arrival of hairy riffraffs on the outskirts of town had previously constituted her version of catastrophe. I'm not sure how much people managed to get their heads around proper disaster after having repeatedly exercised the full powers of her consternation or traffic. Still, Eva seems to be very frustrated with her friends or neighbors and what seems like their inability to understand where she is, while she has also been dismissive of them. Part of this feels like she is distant / a little bit dead on the inside, which she's gone through something tragic. She is coping with it, but also it's common to get into defensive position when you're ganged up on, whether you are guilty of something or not. Also, it's true that people who haven't been through something traumatic, I've had enough conversations with people where they just don't really get the coping mechanisms. They don't really get the mindset, the self-destructive mindset, the self-blaming mindset. They don't really get it. And so then it just becomes no, you need to freaking do better. They just don't understand. Talk to me about the people that don't think addiction is real. Just quote, "Besides, I might be more kindly disposed to this ultra-secular notion that whatever bad thing happens to someone must be held accountable if a curious little halo of blamelessness did not seem to surround those very people who perceive themselves as bordered on every side by agents of wickedness. That is, it seems to be the same folks who are inclined to sue builders who did not perfectly protect them from the depredations of an earthquake, who will be the first to claim that their sons fail their math tests because of attention deficit disorder, and not because he spent the night before at a video arcade instead of studying complex fractions. Therefore, if underlying this huffy relationship to cataclysm, the hallmark of the American middle class, were a powerful conviction that bad things simply shouldn't happen, period, I might find the naivety disarming. But the core conviction of these incensed sorts who greedily rubberneck interstate pile-ups seem rather that bad things shouldn't happen to them. Lastly, though you know I've never been especially religious, after having all that orthodox guff forced on me as a child, though luckily by the time I was 11, my mother could no longer brave the church a whole 4 blocks away and held half-hearted services at home, I still wonder at a race grown so anthrocentric that all events from volcanoes to global temperature shift have become matters for which its individual members are answerable. The species itself is an act, for lack of better words, of God. Personally, I would argue that the births of single dangerous children are an act of God as well, but therein lie our court case. She talks about her lawyer, Harvey, and how he wanted a list of things, not just details, while Eva's working out the details that may be trying to get to the bottom of what happened, but Harvey doesn't really care about that stuff. He's like, it's not important. This is how the law works. Quote, "I'm attempting here, Franklin, because though I tried to answer his questions directly, whenever I made simply exculpatory statements like, of course I love my son, I felt like I was lying and that any judge or jury would be able to tell. Harvey didn't care. He's one of those attorneys who thinks that the law is a game, not as a morality play. I'm told that's the kind that you want. Harvey is fond of declaiming that being in the right never won anyone's case, and that he even left me with the unfocused sense that having justice on your side is a faint disadvantage. The lawyers didn't really care whether Eva was a good mother or bad mother, or what the truth was. He looked at the case economically and the best way to spend less, which was paying the parents suing the court outside of the court. Against counsel, she took this to court for a personal reason. Quote, "Alas, it was not public exoneration that I truly craved." She realizes that while detailing everything that she mentioned, from her job to her responses to motherhood and her quickly changing mind about having Kevin before he was even born, she appeared very unattractive, and she couldn't remember the last time that anyone had ever seen her attractive. A few years before Kevin, she ran into someone that she went to school with who had her own baby, someone that had been a looker and spent much of her time on her body, but pregnancy had made her stop doing workouts, and now that she couldn't do that, her body had changed. In the conversation, the woman only mentioned her ruined body, but nothing about the baby. Then Eva excused herself from that conversation. She said that she is willing to accept fault for every bad thing that she said or did by defining it. She will also say the things that she did not do, but in order to take the blame that she is truly hers, she must come to the very edge of what is hers and is not her responsibility. She says that it was almost a relief to be a cow for once at the time that she was getting pregnant, because half of Americans, for the first time, were overweight, so she didn't have to worry about being made fun of. Half of the country was. While she says that she's taking the blame, she also is pretty much assuming any excitement or optimism that Franklin had about the child was fake. And I can't help but feel like she's projecting here, because she wants to feel better about how poorly she's already thought of Kevin and clearly regretting the pregnancy. And so clearly her husband is also putting on a show for how he feels about the child. She mentions wanting to do a Down syndrome test, and Franklin is like, no, because if you get a Down syndrome test positive, at what point is it enough that you'll kill the baby? A 1 in 500, 1 in 10, 1 in 3? Eva says, quote, "Your arguments were convincing, though I wonder if behind them didn't lurk a poorly thought out romance with a handicapped child." She doesn't really want to believe that her husband could love a child with Down syndrome or any sort of disabilities, and the only thing that he'd get out of having a mentally handicapped child is this feeling of being better than other people because he's taking care of his child. So she tells Franklin that she will not go and get the exam. What I really see here is Eva's complete inability to not only empathize with her child, but with her husband, because she already assumes that every action that even her husband has is insincere, which is also interesting to put up against the actions of Kevin, because she doubts everything that Kevin does is sincere as well. But then when you bring in Celia, who is the daughter that they'll eventually have, she believes everything that Celia does, everything that Celia will say. She babies Celia. So there's a very different relationship between Eva and her husband and son, and Eva and her daughter. Eva tells her husband that she won't go and get a Down syndrome test, but then secretly goes off and gets the Down syndrome test. Quote, "My approach to parenthood was conditional, and the conditions were strict. I did not want to mother an imbecile or a paraplegic. Whenever I saw fatigued women wheeling their stick-limbed progeny with muscle dystrophy for water therapy at Nyack Hospital, my heart didn't melt, it sank. Indeed, an honest list of all that I did not want to nurture, from the garden variety moron to the grotesquely overweight, might run damningly to the second page. In retrospect, my mistake, however, was not that I got the test in secret, but that I found reassurance in its results. Dr. Reinstein did not test for malice, for spiteful indifference, or for congenial meanness. If they could, I wonder how many fish we might throw back." She felt like she was in a competition with others all the time, especially over pain. Though she never really knew what true pain was, she acted like she did. The competition carries into having relief during childbirth to show that she is some kind of on par with her female friends, when you really don't gotta do that. Quote, "I wasn't brave, but I was stubborn and prideful. Sheer obstinacy is far more durable than courage, though it is not as pretty." The way that the doctors at the hospital were acting like her pregnancy was normal because it was a normal workday for them, she felt even more like she needed to be outstanding. Don't show any pain, go through it like she's the boss of it, easy pregnancy. She held out against the birth to the point that the doctor was actually disappointed. It had been a 36-hour labor. And then the doctor is like, if you don't start cooperating, we're going to have to give you a C-section. And that's at the point where Eva's like, okay, I have been holding this child, fighting this child, not wanting to bring this child into the world. I've been resisting Kevin, and now I don't want a C-section. It'll ruin my body more, so I will cooperate. Quote, so I made an effort, at which point I had to recognize that I had been resisting the birth. Whenever the enormous mass approached that tiny canal, I'd been sucking it back because it hurt. It hurt a whole lot. And that new school course, they drummed into you that the pain was good. You were supposed to go with it, push into the pain. And only on my back did I contemplate what retarded advice that was. Pain? Good? I was overcome with contempt. In fact, I'd never told you this before, but the emotions on which I fastened in order to push beyond the critical threshold was loathing. I despised being spread out like some farm exhibit with strangers gawking between my canted knees. I detested Dr. Reinstein's pointed rat-like little face and her brisk, censorious manner. I hated myself for ever having agreed to this humiliating theater when I was fine before, and right at this moment I could have been in France. In the moment that she's giving birth, she hates her husband, hates the child, doesn't care about any of it, and would sell her child into slavery if it would get rid of him. She also is sure that she knew that she was hurting her husband, but whatever, she didn't care at that time. In that moment, when she knows she has to agree to just pass the baby, she says she wants an epidural, and the doctor's like, you're joking, right? It's too late to give it, so you're just going to have to suffer. And in that moment, she associated Kevin's birth with suffering and her defeat because obvious reasons. But she did that to herself. Let's be real. Before Kevin is born, she says that she thought herself a good person, but really it's something else. Quote, we have explicit expectations of ourselves in specific situations. Beyond expectations, they are requirements. Some of these are small. If we are given a surprise party, we are delighted. Others are sizable. If a parent dies, we are grief-stricken. But perhaps in tandem with these expectations is the private fear that we will fail in conventions than the crunch, that we will receive our fearful phone call and our mother is dead and we feel nothing. I wonder if this quiet, unutterable little fear is even keener than the fear of the bad news itself. That we will discover ourselves to be monstrous. At her 10th birthday party, she is given a surprise party that she doesn't even pretend to act correctly at, and that's her first adult lesson. No matter how she felt about other people's parties or how jealous she was, hers would always be a letdown because it would never live up to the expectations of what she wanted. And she wouldn't even know what she wanted, but it would just never reach that level. Quote, nothing. Or nothing in particular, nothing that I could form concretely in my head. That was the problem. I had been awaiting something large and amorphous, a vast big thing, so marvelous that I could not even imagine it. The party that she threw was all too imaginable. For that matter, had she brought in a brass band and magicians, I'd have still been crestfallen. There was no extravagance that would have not fallen short, because it would be finite and fixed. One thing and not another, it would only be what it was. The point is, I don't know what exactly I'd foreseen would happen to me when Kevin was hoisted to my breast. I hadn't foreseen anything I hadn't foreseen anything exactly. I wanted what I could not imagine. I wanted to be transformed. I wanted to be transported. I wanted a door to open and a whole new vista to expand before me that I had never known was there. I wanted nothing short of a revelation, and revelation by its nature cannot be anticipated. It promises that to which you are not yet privy. But if I extracted one lesson from my 10th birthday party, it was that expectations are dangerous when they are both high and uninformed. After Kevin is born, he won't latch on to Eva, won't start drinking, and she gets frustrated. Once Kevin is taken away from her, to be cleaned up and everything, she's actually relieved, and Kevin actually settles down into Franklin's arms, which she says is soul, and she's grateful that Kevin is taken away. She says it's actually soul destroying the level of gratitude she felt when Kevin was no longer with her. At an office party, everyone is at each other's throats, but it's better than nothing. And eventually, one divorcee asks Eva if she's got some help, and she goes on about how she hates how normal psychological labels have become so common and just kind of thrown around. Also, friggin' A, the kids who weren't even at the school when Kevin was there are claiming to be traumatized, which again is something that we've seen plenty of. Quote, even back in 1983, I was bewildered by a standardized psychiatric label like postnatal depression was supposed to be consoling. Our compatriots seem to put much stock in slapping a tag on their ailments, presumably a complaint common enough to have a name implies that you are not alone, and dangle options like internet chat rooms or community support groups for rhapsodic communal bellyaching. The compulsion to bandwagon has even infiltrated American small talk. I can't remember the last time anyone told me that he took a long time to wake up instead of, I'm informed that he's not a morning person. All these fellow travelers who require killer cups of coffee or waking up must provide one's disinclination to hop out of bed for a 10-mile run for some extra clout. She's frustrated that Kevin will not only not drink from her, but will also not take a bottle from her, and she's given up a lot of things and has gone starving to try to take care of Kevin and only put the right nutrients in her body that the doctor told her to have. Franklin has tried to help the situation and Eva connect to Kevin, but it's just not happening. Quote, I was aching to give him the very milk of human kindness, and he did not want it, or he did not want it from me. I shouldn't have taken it personally, but how could I not? It wasn't mother's milk that he didn't want. It was mother. In fact, I became convinced that our little bundle of joy had found me out. Infants have a great intuition because intuition's about all that they've got. I felt certain that he could detect a telltale stiffness in my arms when I picked him up. I was confident that he could infer from a subtlety, exasperated quality in my voice when I blurbed and cooed, and burbling and cooing it did not come naturally to me, and that this precocious ear could isolate the endless stream of placating blatherings as insidious, compulsive sarcasm. She says that she was told to smile at Kevin and he'll smile back, but he never does, and Eva is sure that he knows that her face hurts when she's smiling. She feels like she should have loved him more, should have cared about him more, and she should have had more tenderness with him and was supposed to be a mother, but instead she felt guilty of emotional malfeasance. She never saw Kevin as the baby, but as some cunning individual trying to undermine her at every turn. Meanwhile, Franklin went from saying our son when referring to Kevin to my son, which also got to Eva. Quote, I so mixed and matched the planet that you sometimes worried I had no commitments to anything or anywhere. Though you were wrong. My commitments were simply far-flung and obscenely specific. By the same token, I could not love a child. I would have to love this one. Meanwhile, Franklin loved the idea of the United States much more than the United States itself, so he overlooked a lot of frivolous things that his countrymen did because the idea of the U.S. is so strong and so meaningful to him. Eva mentions the different cries that babies have, and Kevin didn't even do any of them. She says that Kevin screamed all day, every day, no matter what, not wanting anything until Franklin came home and then took care of him. That's when he would stop. It made Eva want to slug Kevin. He's still an infant at this time, my guys. And for me, it just feels like Kevin could tell that his mother was resentful and that he was kind of scared of his mother even as an infant because of her hidden hostility that wasn't really hidden. He just got the bad vibes. We know them vibes around here, don't we? Eva is sure that the problem is with Kevin. This infant is just angry and hates being alive because no one asked him and no one is consoling him. Franklin and Eva argue about Eva not being there for Kevin in the way that she needs to be. She's impatient and angry, and the neighbors are complaining about how noisy Kevin is and if they're going to move out. She keeps insisting that Kevin is doing this to her on purpose and behaving for Franklin, and Franklin offers that they maybe get a nanny to help take care of the baby. Immediately, Eva is talking about flying to another country because thank God someone else will take care of her child. Quote, so I staggered back to the couch as if reeling from my revelations. You were angry at me. Fatherhood hadn't disappointed you. I had. You thought that you'd married a trooper. Instead, your wife was proving a whiner, the very peevish sort she decried amid America's malcontented overft, for whom a commonplace travail like missing a FedEx delivery 3 times in a row and having to go to the depot constituted intolerable stress. During the fight, Eva grabs a thermometer and finds out that she has a fever of 104. She takes it twice since Franklin doesn't believe her at first, and because of that, Franklin puts Kevin down, and that earns Eva's admiration. See, this also makes me think I can see this reflection from Franklin and Eva's relationship also going into Kevin, because a lot of the time when Kevin would report things to Eva, she's also like, I don't believe you. I don't freaking believe you. And so if Eva got that from her husband, Franklin, every time she said something like, hey, I feel this way. I don't believe you. You're the problem. Hey, Franklin, I'm feeling sick. I don't believe you. Take your temperature again. Like, that's going to transfer over. And it's obviously going to cause an issue in Eva to be treated like that, but it's also going to cause an issue in a child being brought up up in that world where his parents, one of them tries to force him into being something and doesn't listen to him when he talks, and the other one is constantly aggressive at him, so he's aggressive back. Eva talks about receiving a phone call from a reporter willing to take her side on things, but she's annoyed at the idea, especially of giving another misunderstood boy his time on television. She doesn't want those 15 minutes of fame. Quote, "When my caller launched into some nonsense about insight into disturbed boys being vital, so the next time we can see it coming, I cut him off. I saw it coming for nearly 16 years, Mr. Malin," I snapped. "A fat lot of good that did," and hung up. Funny that she should believe that he was evil from the day that she was born, and what did she do? In all reality, what I've seen so far is a resentful mother who hated her child, and she contracted an illness in her breast that made her unable to feed, and also made her desperately ill. So Franklin's hired some nannies to help take care of Kevin. There were two different nannies, because the first one didn't quite work out, and quit quickly. And then the second one is an Irish woman named Siobhan. She doesn't really believe that Siobhan likes taking care of Kevin, and he has all of the same problems with her, but not with Franklin. Eventually, Siobhan is offered housing and to be a live-in nanny with more money, and she says no. Eva is pretty sure it's because Kevin is such a little freaking terror that the nanny is like, no, I like to go home. Siobhan says that she has different plans for the future. Eva says that she wishes that she had met Franklin when she was younger, so they didn't feel so pressured to move the relationship so fast and have kids. She bribes Siobhan to stay for a bit longer instead of just bouncing out of this nanny gig so that they can find another nanny and so that Kevin is not without a caretaker. Once she pays Siobhan that little extra, she also gives Siobhan time off, like for the rest of the week, so that she can rest. And then Eva goes to talk to the infant Kevin in his crib. Quote, "Siobhan thinks that I should talk to you," I said archly over the din. "Who else is going to, since you drove her off?" "That's right. You screamed and puked her out the door. What's your problem, you little shit? Proud of yourself for ruining Mummy's life? I was careful to use that insipid falsetto the experts commend. You've got Daddy snowed, but Mommy's got your number. You're a little shit, aren't you?" Kevin hoisted to a stand without missing a yowl. Clutching the bars, he screamed at me for just a few inches away, and my ears hurt. So scrunched up his face looked like an old man's, and it was screwed into an "I'm gonna get you" expression of a convict who'd already started digging a tunnel with a nail file. On a purely zookeeping level, my proximity was hazardous. Siobhan hadn't been kidding about the hair. "Mummy was happy before Widow Kevin came along. And you know that, don't you? And now Mummy wakes up every day and wishes that she were in France. Mummy's life sucks now. Doesn't Mummy's life suck? Do you know that there are some days that Mummy would rather be dead rather than listen to you screech for 1 minute more on some days, that Mommy would rather jump off the Brooklyn Bridge?" Franklin gets home just in time to hear this little screed, and so he hires a nanny to take Kevin away from Eva until she can get her head on straight. The two of them confer that they will be moving to the burbs, and Eva freaking hates the suburbs. She wants to live in the city. She is a city girl, but whatever. They agree that she can go on a out-of-the-country extravaganza trip like she normally does. He will take care of Kevin, and they're going to move to the burbs. Like, that's part of the agreement. Eva says that she didn't used to have a good relationship with her mother, but after what happened with Kevin, it gave some common ground to talk to her mom since she also had suffered, and Kevin's choices fit right in with the family. Meanwhile, she goes over Kevin's early childhood and assumes that he's diabolical and smart and everything that he does is an affront to her. So while he was crying all the time before and she was like, "This is an affront to me," he stops crying all the time and she's like, "This is an affront to me." Now he's like way too freaking quiet. She got him tested, hoping that there would be some kind of disorder like autism, and she doesn't see anything. She says that she wasn't heartless. She hated children's cartoons for being condescending, but one day she turned one on and baby Kevin spoke in full sentences, saying that he didn't like it. She had bothered him to speak up to this point and tried to get him to say things. She had even tried to get Kevin to call her mom in these practices to try to get Kevin to talk, even though she was like, "I didn't really like being called mom, and so I really didn't want him to call me mom, but it felt like I needed to." When Franklin comes home, Kevin doesn't say anything, and this leads Eva to consider Kevin, the toddler, as a fully formed being. Quote, "You regarded a child as a partial creature, a simple form of life which evolved into the complexity of adulthood in open view. But from the instant he was laid on my breast, I perceived Kevin Cachadorian as pre-existent, with a vast fluctuating interior life whose subtlety and intensity would, if anything, diminish with age. Most of all, he seemed hidden from me. With your experience was one of sunny, leisurely access. She discusses how, during a birthday party, when he was but a baby, he tore the stuffing out of a stuffed animal, and when birthday cake was put in front of him, he pillaged it, and she says it was diabolical. Quote, he was underweight, in consequence of which he never had those rounded, blunt features of the roly-poly toddler that can make even homey children adorable for the photogenic window between 2 and 3. Instead, his face had that ferret-like sharpness from the earliest years. If nothing else, I'd have liked to have been able to gaze later at photographs of a pudgy heartbreaker and wonder what went wrong. Instead, the snaps I have, and you took stacks, all documented a sober-sided wariness and disturbing self-possession. The narrow olive face is instantly familiar, recessed eyes, sheer straight nose with a wide bridge and a slight hook, thin lips set to obscured determination. Those pictures are recognizable not only for their resemblance to the class photograph that appeared in all of the papers, but for the resemblance to me. Eva sounds like she wants something to be wrong with Kevin to justify her hating him. Everything that she does reinterprets what he does with malice, and it just makes me think that she has deluded herself with how much she's hated the idea of being a mother. That she assumed that her child is evil and treated him evil with this disdain, and then he grows up to be it. It kind of makes me think of when somebody is writing a book, like Guns and Smoke, and a character is brought in, and everybody is really mean to that character, and then at the end of the book, it's recognized that, oh, that character is villain. It's revealed that she's a villain. And the main characters are like, see, I was justified in treating them like that. They were going to turn. That's what Eva feels like with her son. She finally has agreed to move to the suburbs if she can go to Africa for a job, and so that happens. She has considered her shortcomings to Kevin, but is not going to help her be a better mother to him. Quote, nothing is interesting if you're not interested. In vain, I had been waiting for Kevin to prove out, to demonstrate, as I stood arms folded, that he was worthy of my adore. That was too much to demand of a little boy who would only be lovable to me as I would allow him to be. It was past time that I at least met Kevin halfway. Flying into Kennedy, I was bursting with determination, optimism, and goodwill, but in retrospect, I do feel obligated to observe that I was at my most passionate about our son when he was not there. She's at a gathering with others and are talking about a man who just went postal when they think that she's got expertise on the situation, since this guy just, shot up his workplace, and they're like, well, your son shot up a school, and they get embarrassed that they even brought that up to her. She thinks back to the trial and how her hiring someone to take over her work for her after she spent some time in Africa when Kevin was 4. She looked like a mother making great sacrifices by not doing her job anymore or as much, taking a step back in order to take care of her son and give Kevin a stable guardian to oversee him. She wonders if she started her defense way back then for what Kevin would become. Quote, I thought it looked good. I'd never conceived of myself as one who dwelled upon what other people thought, but hoarders of guilty secrets are inevitably consumed by appearances. When she got back from her trip from Africa, she was actually disappointed that Kevin was there because she had been hoping to just have some time alone with Franklin. Instead, they go to a neighborhood restaurant with 4-year-old Kevin, and Kevin just keeps going, nah, 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 not having real conversations. I mean, he's 4. What are you expecting? He also seems kind of bored. He notices that the waitress has a birthmark on her face and asks her why she's got poop on her face. Eva is completely embarrassed by this and is like, that kid is just being a dick on purpose. He knew that was not poop, but he felt like he needed to say it. Look, I know the propensity towards toilet humor. I work with a couple of older dudes in their 70s, and they still make poop humor jokes. That is just the way it is. Not all men. I'm just saying I don't think it was malicious. I don't think this 4-year-old was being malicious by saying, is that poop on your face? Okay, sue me. Eva expresses her dislike for the way Kevin is acting towards the waitress, and Franklin is like, bro, he's a kid. He doesn't know any better. And Eva is like, yeah, he does know better. This is a little freaking genius over here. He keeps neneneng everything and putting salt on his food when it comes, and then she threatens that if he doesn't stop, they're going to go home, followed by, quote, I don't know why I threatened him with departure, lacking any evidence that he wanted to stay. This was my first taste of what would become a chronic conundrum. How do you punish a boy with an almost zen-like indifference to whatever you might deny him? I can understand this one enough because when I was a kid, I was a problem child. If you can imagine, right? I would never be a problem. But when my dad would try to punish, we got the spankings, we got the mouth washed out, we got our stuff taken away. Well, I had my door taken off the hinges and had no door for a while. And it was just like all of my stuff would be taken out of my room so that I would have nothing to play with, nothing to keep me occupied because I had just defied him. Like, it's not like I was going out starting fires or anything. As my dad would be like, if you talk back to me, you get punished. If you say no to me, you get punished. If you do not take my command when I say jump and you don't say how high, you get punished. And so I would constantly fight him. By fight him, I mean deny him. Because I don't know, I was a little kid that just didn't like the bully. And so I ended up losing everything in my room. And I'm like, okay, fine. Because I've always been somebody that kind of goes into my head. So you could take all of my stuff in my room and I'll just sit in the middle of my floor and I'll escape and play pretend in my head. Like, there's nothing that you can do. And that was one of the problems that my dad went to my mom with later is like, how do we punish this child? When she just goes with everything. And like, obviously, spankings and washing my mouth out for talking back did not do anything either. It just made me more sure that I was going to fight you. Why are all of my books filled with rebels? I don't know. Look, Casey a good boy. Casey a rebel, for real. Anyway, when Kevin doesn't stop making noises, Eva gets frustrated and slaps him, and then he stops. Like, she slaps him. This is not the only time that she will be physically abusive to this child. So he starts crying, obviously. Eva says that his tears came too late to even freaking be real. That child, she slaps him, and she says his tears aren't real. Like, this is how much she hates and doesn't believe this child. Franklin changes the conversation eventually by saying he bought a house for them while she was out of the country, and she gets really mad that he bought a house without her, and he's like, I know you don't even like the suburbs. I know you didn't want to spend time doing house shopping because it would have taken time away from everything else you wanted to do, so I just got one while you were out so that you didn't have to deal with it. He's like, I thought you would be happy that you didn't have to freaking go house shopping. I'm sorry. They eventually leave. She apologizes for not being excited for him and thinks about how embarrassed she is by what happened in the restaurant. She's one of those people that used to feel sorry for the other adults when they had family meltdowns at restaurants, and now she's one of those people that other people are judging, and she is aware of it. Now she talks about how since she's no longer with Franklin, she can tell him how much she hated the house that he bought. Quote, the mausoleum on Palisades Parade came out precisely as its creators intended, and that's what made it so depressing. To be fair, the gap between most people's capacity to conjure beauty from scratch and to merely recognize it when they see it is a width of the Atlantic Ocean. So all the evidence to the contrary, the original owners may have had pretty good taste. More, it's a pity that they did. That kind of makes me think of how people might look at television or movies or something or books and be able to critique, be able to say, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, this is why it was done well, but then not be able to create it because the difference between the capacity to conjure beauty from scratch and merely recognize it are not the same thing. She said that she always felt off around Franklin's family and that there was not much to them. They were very mechanical. Quote, still, everything in their house was buffed to a high, flat shine, so much reflection to protect the fact that there was nothing underneath. They didn't read. There were few books. The set of encyclopedias, the wine-colored spines, warmed up the din. But the only well-leafed volumes were instruction manuals, the do-it-yourself how-tos, cookbooks, and a haggard set of the Way of Things Work volumes 1 and 2. They had no comprehension why anyone would seek out a film with an unhappy ending or buy a painting that wasn't pretty. They owned top-shelf stereos with speakers worth $1,000 apiece and only a handful of easy listening and best-of CDs. Opera stoppers, classical greatest hits. That sounds lazy, but I think it was more helpless. They didn't know what music was for. This sounds so familiar to some certain people that I know. Eva eventually does get pregnant a second time, but she hides it from Franklin long enough so that it's harder to just make a comment about aborting it, though I don't think Franklin would, considering the type of person that he is. But everybody is sort of noticing that she's a little bit squishier looking. They're making comments about her. Both Franklin and Kevin are making comments here and there. And all the time that she's pregnant, she actually doesn't hate it as much. She's feeling more alive than she did when she was with Kevin. And she wants to name it after Franklin's aunt. If it's a girl, she's going to name it Celia. She has more freedom this time, even after Franklin learns that she's pregnant. He's not so overbearing. He's not so worried about what she's going to do, if it's going to affect the baby. And so she feels like it's just a much nicer, much friendlier, much better experience of pregnancy than it had been with Kevin. She also describes the birth as fast and easy, and that Celia was actually excited to meet her. She came 2 weeks early. She is very grateful for this daughter, and though it seems that Franklin might feel as though liking her is going to be a betrayal of Kevin, he keeps himself at a distance from Celia. And so does he not like Celia? Does he not want to like Celia? Is it just guilt? Eva is mad at Franklin for reinforcing gender stereotypes with boys while saying, Kevin's going to play with trucks, girls play with dolls, and he's like, Kevin just seems impatient. When Kevin goes to meet Celia for the first time, he just seems impatient and disinterested, flicking water on the baby's face multiple times until he is walked out of the room. Eva is refreshed, loving this new baby, and is ready for what she is going to bring, but says little could she know that a trusting young girl was worse than nothing in military allies. Everyone likes Celia way more than Kevin in the neighborhood. She is seen as a cute little girl. She's so sweet. She's so loving. She's so playful. And while everybody wants to be around Celia, they make excuses to not be around Kevin. Celia doesn't cry about anything, never fusses, doesn't ask for anything, just accepts her conditions. At least that's what Eva says. And it's just like, she's so uncrying that I have to go out and seek her out to feed her because she never cries if she's not unfed. Celia is pretty much the exact opposite of what Kevin was in every single way, including the food that she doesn't like. She does have things that she likes or doesn't like. She's potty trained before she's even 2 years old. And However, she is afraid of going to the bathroom by herself and actually has a long list of fears. Franklin says that Eva is coddling Celia. Kevin would then be mean to Celia, pranking her, and Eva is sure that this is because Kevin is evil, not out of jealousy of all of the attention that Celia is getting, especially when she gets all of Mom's attention in ways that he never got Mom's attention. She talks about Kevin's black and white cookie personality and that Kevin was more sardonic and sarcastic when Dad wasn't home. She does have this one memory of when Kevin was not as much of a dick, though, and it's when he was really, really sick that he stopped being a pill and showed a much softer side to himself. He let his mother take care of him without making a comment, without making a complaint, and he wasn't mean to his sister. In fact, when she brought him some drawings that she did because he was sick, he was like, "Those are so nice, Celia. Why don't you go and do some more of those?" And when his dad got home, he really didn't want his dad's attention or anything to do with his dad. And Eva says this is probably because he had to perform for his dad and he just didn't have the energy to perform for his dad. He wanted to be around his mom, and he actually showed preference to wanting to be around Eva and have Eva take care of him. Eva says that this made Franklin jealous. Quote, "Kevin made himself up for you, and there must have been, in the very lavishness of his fabrications, a deep and aching desire to please. But do you ever consider how disappointed he must have been when you accepted the decoy as the real thing?" She reads him Robin Hood because it's one of his favorite books, and he actually enjoys the company until he gets better. Eva knows that he's better because then he starts back up with the aggressive quips and the defiance, and then he is reading Robin Hood by himself, and Eva is like, well, it was nice while it lasted. I kind of find it interesting that there was only one experience of this happening, but it shows that Eva can, one, be nurturing, and two, Kevin is soft, but there is something else going on there that makes him fight her. And it's not just that he's evil. There is something else going on with their relationship. She visits Kevin in Juvenile Delinquent Center, taunts him, and it's really this power dick move measuring contest all over again, as she seems that she does not even try to get along with him, which, fair, she's going to be mad at him for what's happened. She's going to be really mad at him for what he's taken from her, which is a lot more than at this time as she's writing letters to Franklin. We'll get into that. You'll see. I'm trying not to spoil the ending of this video. It's fair that she is upset. It's fair that she is angry, that she hates him because of everything that he did. But going to the juvie to then like mock your son for the issues that's like her therapy, I guess, because that's all that she does for the majority of this book. One of the ways that she tries to taunt him is she mentions one of the girls that died at school, and it says, was that a girl that you were interested in? A girl that turned you down because you're just some loser who couldn't get her attention? Wah, 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 little baby loser that nobody likes. And Kevin says, how much did you even care about anything that went on in my head until it got out of it? Which, to me, speaks to what is bothering Kevin. It's that his mom never cared, his dad never cared, and never wanted to know his thoughts, never wanted to like it. And if you watch the interactions with Kevin throughout time, it's like his mom constantly mocked anything that he liked, and he was never good enough. And she always complained to him about literally everything. She complained to him about his like of archery, his like of mini golf, his like of television shows. She complained to him about freaking his classmates and the classmates that got picked up in SUVs and how shitty SUVs were and how shitty America is. And he's like, is there anything that you don't think you're better at? We'll get there. I got those quotes. But she just wanted to impose on him while she was there, and he didn't want her. Anyway, so she visits to impose on him, and he didn't want her there. She just is wanting to impose on him, and he keeps giving her chances because he's at least meeting with her at the juvie center. Quote, I admit, I tried to make him mad today. I was determined to make him feel small, not the deep, dark, impenetrable conundrum of our contemporary society, but the butt of a joke, hoisted on his own retard. Because every time Kevin takes another bow as evil incarnate, he swells a little larger, each slander slewed in his direction, nihilistic, morally destitute, depraved, degenerate, debased, bulks his scrawny frame better than my cheese sandwiches ever did. No wonder he's broadening out. He eats the world's heartiest denunciations for breakfast. Well, I don't want him to feel unfathomable, a big, beefed-up allegory of generational disaffection. I don't want to allow him to cloak the sordid particulars of his tacky, crappy, grim-crack derivative stunts with the grand mantle of rudderless youth today. I want him to feel like one of those miserable, all too understandable snippets of a plain dumb kid. I want him to feel witless and sniveling and inconsequential, and the last thing in the world I want to betray is how much of my day, every day, I spend trying to figure out what makes that boy tick. Also an interesting bit, quote, sure, most children have a taste for spoliation. Tearing things apart is easier than making them. However, exacting as preparations for Thursday, they couldn't have been nearly as demanding as it would have been to befriend these people instead. So annihilation is a kind of laziness, but it still provides the satisfaction of agency. I wreck, therefore I am. Besides, for most people, construction is tight, concentration, bunchy, whereas vandalism offers release. You have to be quite an artist to give positive expression to abandon, and there's an ownership to destruction and intimacy and appropriation. In this way, Kevin has clutched Denny Corbett and Laura Wolford to his breast, inhaled their hearts and hobbies whole. Destruction may be nothing more complicated than acquisitiveness, a kind of ham-handed, misguided greed. Then she details a dance that she chaperoned in middle school that was at Kevin's school, and one of the things here, she remembers this girl, she says, let's call her Alice, came with this full-length gown while all of the other girls were just wearing jeans. You know, she was dressed to the nine, and she's like, her mom probably dressed her like that and said, you're going to look so amazing, go and do this. And then let's call her Alice goes on to the dance floor during Stairway to Heaven and then just starts dancing her heart out like nobody else is in the room. Everybody else is just watching her and paying attention. And near the end of the song, Kevin goes on to the stage to whisper something in her ear. And this entire time that she is doing it, Eva is judging this girl, being like, well, she looks stupid. Everybody knew she was a loser. Look at the way that she's dressed. She's never going to be anything. And then she judges Kevin for going up and saying something that's like, he probably told her what everybody else was thinking, because she immediately leaves the room. And it's like, Kevin, you're the problem for saying what everybody else was thinking right to her face. But she doesn't condemn herself for having those thoughts and for doing that to her. And she's like, well, maybe that little girl will never dance in public ever again because she learned her freaking lesson. And that was the first assassination that happened in this room, in this school. Boom. Eva's then invited to a church and she says, I'm not going to go. Why would I freaking go to church? All the church people judge me all the time, so why would I not judge church people? Based on what happened in the last few years with her kids, she's also like, this is proof that God's not real, because why would this happen if God is real? She also says to Franklin, quote, maybe I'm shallow, but you were enough for me. I loved scanning for faces outside of customs after a long trip that were so much harder on you than they were on me, and sleeping late the next morning in a hot pictorial cocoon. It was enough, but our twosome was not. It seems enough for you. While that may make you, between us, the more spiritually advanced, it hurt my feelings. Yet there was no reason to live without a child. How could there be one? To answer one life with a successive life is to simply transfer the onus of purpose to the next generation. The displacement amounts to cowardly and potentially infinite delay. Your child's answer presumably will to be procreate as well, and in doing so to distract themselves, to foist their own aimlessness onto their offspring. I raise this matter because I think that you did expect Kevin to answer your big question, that you could sense that fantastic expectation from an early age. How? Small things. The aggressive hardiness in your voice, under which gasped a shy desperation, the veracity of your embrace, which he may have found smothering, the resolve with which you cleared your deck every weekend to put yourself at his disposal. While I suspect that children want their parents to be busy, they don't want to have to fill their schedule with their paltry needs. Children want to be assured that there are other things to do, important things, more important on occasion than they are. After thinking that it's good that she and Franklin had church to leave because it at least gave them something to make a decision on, that they were able to make that decision on their own, she's like, I don't think it would have helped Kevin for us to fake being faithful just so he could decide to leave the faith. Also, I don't think we could have put on that kind of act. You also get some very heavy resentment with this section. Quote, it is Kevin who has posed my big question. Before he came along, I'd been much too busy attending to a flourishing business and a marvelous marriage to bother about what it'll amount to. Only once I was stuck with a bored child in an ugly house for days on end did I ask myself, what was the point? Then there was this one night that the cops actually brought Kevin in when he was 14. This is shortly before he shoots up the school, because he does his shooting the school when he's 15. And so he was on an overpass with his friend named Lenny, and they were throwing bricks off of the overpass. And then the cop is like, I'm leaving you here with just a warning. And so then Eva and Franklin have Kevin describe what was happening. And Kevin says, well, we were up there just like throwing water balloons at cars. And then Lenny started throwing the bricks. And then he told me when the cops showed up that he was going to get in big trouble if they pulled him in because he'd been in trouble before. So I covered for him so that because I would get in less trouble, probably. And that is what happened. And so that's what I did. Eva comes home early one of the next days and hears Lenny and Kevin talking to one another. And Kevin said he did save Lenny's butt and that Lenny owes him one, but doesn't want anything to do with this because this stuff is so freaking trite. It is so freaking trite that it's stupid, and he doesn't want it to ever happen again. Don't do it again, Lenny. This entire time, Eva did not believe that Kevin's story that he was covering for Lenny, and was, again, fighting with Franklin over what Kevin was saying. And that's important because constantly the two of them fighting over whether or not to believe Kevin does become a big issue in their relationship that ultimately becomes a breaking point. But we'll get there. Eva is then asking her son on a mother-son outing thing so that they can go bond. They are going to go and do mini golf because that's something that Kevin likes. Then they're going to go Christmas shopping and they're going to go to dinner together. But bro, you wonder what you did to make Kevin the way he is. And this is how you think of your child. Quote, in a switch-off reminiscent of The Prince and the Pauper, I would assume the role of Kevin's caring, engaged parent, while he would become Celia's protector for the day. Gosh, you quipped lightly, going to come up with something to do that doesn't terrify her. Guess that rules vacuuming out. To say that I truly desired to spend all afternoon and evening with my prickly 14-year-old son would be a stretch. But I did powerfully desire to desire it, if that makes any sense. Knowing how time went slack around that boy, I had scheduled our day, miniature golf, shopping on Main Street in Nyack, and then I would treat him to a nice dinner out. The fact that he didn't care about Christmas presents or fine dining seemed no reason to skip the less lesson that this is simply what people do. As for our sporting escapade, no one is meant to care about miniature golf, which must be why he felt so apt. Like, also, I get that she likes the finer things in life, but like, why wouldn't she ask, hey, where would you like to go for dinner? You want to go to like McDonald's? Just take him to do something he wants to do. He obviously isn't into all of this like snobby stuff, and that's what it is. He does think his mom is a snob. I mean, we're gonna see it when they're at dinner. She talks about her car and how exclusive and special it is, and snaps at Kevin for not bringing a coat on their little venture. She also snaps at him for not liking things that she likes, she doesn't like, and she also snaps at him for liking things she doesn't like and not liking things that she does like. She also insists that they need to do this mother-son outing for their relationship. She is miserable the whole time, and he she is miserable the whole time. Oh my gosh. So they get to mini golf. He obviously doesn't have a coat. He is shivering. He is noticeably shivering. And she is like, well, you know what? He's just going to have to deal with this because I'm not taking us back home. Franklin will be like, why are you home already? It'll be like I lost. So Kevin just gets to shiver. While they're doing mini golf, she doesn't try to have a conversation with him. She doesn't engage in conversation. She races through the track so they go through it really, really fast. And she is checking her watch constantly. So she is not engaged. And she's like, this is so stupid. Once they are done at mini golf, then she takes him back to the house to get his jacket, and then they go shopping. While they're shopping, she keeps offering up, what if we get Celia this? What if we get Franklin that? And Kevin is like, that's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. That's really stupid. That's trendy. And so then Eva starts getting very self-conscious because Kevin just is saying his mind, and she ends up buying nothing because everything she points out makes her feel stupid based on his response. Then they go to dinner. And when they're going to dinner, he's actually all dressed up. And not only that, and she's about to compliment him on how nice he looks, but then she also notices that he's hanging over the sink in the living room, that he's hanging over the sink in the kitchen, stuffing chicken into his mouth before they're supposed to go and eat. She's like, what are you doing? We're going to go have dinner. And he's like, I was hungry now. So then obviously they go to dinner. And he's not eating because he just ate at home, so he's not hungry. But she's like, I'm not going to let this stop me from eating. So she's got full spread. He's got nothing. And she's like, the optics of this. Freaking, I'm going to try to not let it ruin my life. This is also not that strange for Kevin especially, because even when he was a kid, she talked about how he would not eat in front of her. Is like she would make him food, and then he would refuse to eat it. And then when she wasn't watching, then he would. So it seems like a sort of disordered control thing as well, because the pooping is a control thing too. The bathroom is one of the few things he had control over, and so is the eating. So he would not let his mom control his eating. He would not let his mom control his bathroom usages. So we're sitting at dinner, and mom is just complaining about everything, as she always does. The SUVs, stupid Americans, this and that, and he is just zoning out. He doesn't freaking care. And so then he goes, okay, I've got a topic. Quote, you're always griping about this country and wishing that you were in Malaysia or something. What's your problem with this place? Really? American materialism? Which, ironic, since they were just, Christmas shopping. Quote, much like Kevin when I proposed this date, I suspected a trap, but I had an entree and 2/3 of a bottle to go, and I didn't want to spend it drawing tic-tac-toes on a disposable tablecloth. No, I don't think that's it. After all, as your grandfather would say, materials are everything. So what's your beef? This is sure to dumbfound you, but in that moment I couldn't think of one thing wrong with the United States. I'm often stymied in this vein. When some stranger on a plane, making conversation when I put down my book, asks what other novels I've enjoyed, I draw such a perfect blank that my seatmate might infer that a paperback stuffed in a magazine pocket is the first fiction I've ever read in my life. My leery outlook on the United States was precious to me, even if, thanks to you, I had learned to give the country grudging credit for at least being a spirited, improvisational sort of place that, despite its veneer of conformity cultivated by an impressive profusion of outright lunatics, abruptly incapable of citing a single feature of this country that drove me around the bend, I felt the bottom fall out for a second and worried that maybe I hadn't kept the U.S. at arm's length from sophisticated cosmopolitanism, but rather from petty prejudice. She complains about a couple of things that Kevin has already heard before getting into, quote, "People around here can't just go for a walk. They have to be getting with some kind of program. And you know, this may be at the heart of what's my beef. All of those intangibles of life, the really good but really elusive stuff that makes life worth living. Americans seem to believe that they can all be obtained by joining a group or signing up a subscription or going on a special diet or undergoing aromatherapy. It's not just that Americans think that they can buy everything. They think that if you follow the instructions on the label, the product has to work. Then, when the product doesn't work and they are still unhappy, even though it's a right to happiness enshrined in our Constitution, they sue the bejesus out of each other." Which, pause on this quote for a second, makes me think of the people that look into writing advice and look for just the correct writing advice and think that if you follow just the correct advice, period, point blank, that you will have a story that takes off. Everyone will love you, will never get criticism. You just got to write the perfect story. People do look for instruction manuals. I do recognize that. Quote, "Of course there's anything else," I said, feeling the momentum that gets rolling in those plain chats when I finally get access to the library in my head, remembering Madame Bovary and Jude the Obscure and the Passage of India. Americans are fat, inarticulate, and ignorant. They're demanding, imperious, and spoiled. They're self-righteous and superior about their precious democracy and condescending towards other nationalities because they think that they've got it right. Never mind that half of the adult population doesn't vote, and they're boastful too. Believe it or not, in Europe it isn't considered acceptable to foist on new acquaintances right off the bat that you went to Harvard and own your own big house and what it costs and which celebrities come to dinner. And Americans never pick up either that in some places it's considered crass to share your taste for anal sex with someone at a cocktail party you've known for 5 minutes, since the whole concept of privacy here has fallen by the wayside. That's because Americans are trusting to a fault, innocent in a way that makes you stupid. Worst of all, they have no idea that the rest of the world can't stand them. Kevin, listening to her intently, had been taking notes this entire time, though Eva thought that he was doodling, and then she's like, oh no, he was making a rebuttal. He says, quote, "Let's see. Spoiled. You're rich. I'm not too sure what you think you're doing without, but I bet that you could afford it. Imperious. Pretty good description for that speech just now. If I was you, I wouldn't order dessert, because you can bet that the waiter's gonna hawk a loogie in your raspberry sauce. Inarticulate? Let me see." He searches the tablecloth and reads aloud, "It's not that easy, or maybe it is that easy. I don't know. I don't call that Shakespeare myself. Also, seems to me that I'm sitting across from a lady who goes on those long rants about reality TV when she's never watched a single show, and that one of your favorite words, mumsy, is ignorant. Next, boasting. What was all of those dumb fucks suck dead moose, dickhead, and I'm so much cooler than them if it wasn't showing off. Like somebody who thinks that she's got it right and nobody else does. Trusting, with no idea that other people can't stand them." He underscores that one, then looked me in the eye with naked dislike. "Well, far as I can tell, about the only thing that keeps you and the other dumbass Americans from being peas in a pod is you're not fat. And just because you're skinny, you act self-righteous, condescending, and superior. Maybe I'd rather have a big cow of a mother who at least didn't think that she was better than everybody else in the fucking country." Boy was waiting. She pays the bill, and they don't spend alone time like that ever again, until he's in juvie. Eva then buys Celia this illegal elephant shrew for Christmas. Why? I don't know. She goes through all of this stuff about how it went to a special exotic pet store and that Celia wanted it because it was so cute and it kind of looked like Celia with its big eyes and its big head, and then one day it goes missing and Celia won't say that it's gone missing until they kind of pressure her, they being the parents, and then Franklin and Eva go looking for it and eventually they find it and they tell her. They come up with what they're going to tell her about what happened to it, and Eva's thinking about getting her another one, and Franklin is like, I think her broken heart, just one of those this year is enough. We don't need more of that. There is also another school shooter in the news. Someone reported it, and that he was well-liked, but others said that the guy was also a loser. So you've got conflicting reports on this person, and The official report eventually says that nobody liked this kid. He was never popular. He had 0 friends. And Eva's like, yeah, of course they did that, because if he was popular, it wouldn't fit the archetype of what these shooters were supposed to freaking be like. And so nobody would believe it. There's only one appropriate archetype for what can be a school shooter, and that's the freaking loser. She also is annoyed that everybody knows the school shooter's name, but nobody knows the victims' names, and so she reminds herself the victims' names. Then we've got Celia, who is taken to the hospital because she got drain cleaner in her eye when Kevin was supposed to be babysitting her. And Eva is so certain that Kevin did this to her that she keeps badgering and keeps going after Franklin, saying, Kevin did this, Kevin did this. And Kevin's expression of what happened was, he heard Celia making noise and then ran to her and then tried to help clean out her eye and then called the hospital as soon as possible, called dad as soon as possible, got her there. And the damage was too corrosive that she does end up losing her eye. And it doesn't matter what the story is. Eva is not believing it. When Franklin is talking to Eva about this, he's like, you were using the drain cleaner yesterday. Maybe you forgot to lock it up. And she's like, I did not lock it up. That would never happen. And Franklin's like, it could happen. Are you saying it's more likely that your son specifically did this to her than for you to accidentally leave the drain cleaner out that your daughter would then get into? And she's like, she doesn't go in the bathroom alone. I could not have done this. Okay, it was Kevin. And then Franklin is like, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Okay, whatever. But don't talk to Kevin about this. Don't go and blame him to his face. Later, she picks Kevin up from school one day and complains about the other kids not being able to walk to school themselves, not being able to walk around, and the SUVs. Quote, the street was lined with several other vehicles waiting to rescue children from having to walk as much as 10 feet on their own steam, and I remark on that fact that every single car was an SRO. It was out of my mouth before I remembered that Kevin hated my teasing malprosums for SUVs. One more pretend gaffe to service the myth that I didn't really live here. You know, those things are a metaphor for the whole country, I went on. I had been put on notice that this sort of talk drove my son insane, but maybe that's why I pursued it, much as I would later bring up Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris and Claverack just to goad him. They sit on the roadside higher and mightier than anyone else, and they have more power than anyone knows what to do with. Even the profile they cut, they always remind me of fat shoppers waddling down the mall in supercut Bermuda shorts and giant padded sneakers, stuffing their faces with cinnamon buns. I felt like she was just getting more ranty. She was just like more prepared to judge everybody at this point. She's like, I'm done. I'm out of this. I'm Audi 5000. She mentions also seeing Kevin jacking off at the house, and she assumes that he is doing it on purpose when she goes to start cooking and then leaves the bathroom open specifically so that she runs into seeing him jacking off. And she's like, look, honey, I'm not saying that I have a problem because people just jack off. It's what they do. It's natural, especially for teenage boys, but he's maliciously jacking off to make me look at him, okay? And Franklin is like, oh my gosh, stop. You are insane. Stop. We also get Eva finally talking to Celia about what happened with her eye and the day that her eye got hurt. And Celia's only response is that Kevin hurt her when she was in need. She just got something in her eye, and then Kevin came to her when she called and helped her clean out her eye as best as he could. So she has nothing bad to say about Kevin on that day. And now whether that's her covering for Kevin or Kevin did something is up to you, the reader, to decide how you feel about Kevin. March 11th, 2001, she's talking about 4 more shootings that happened in the spring of 1998. Celia is going to be getting a false eye that is painted, and actually the eye doctor that is painting the eye also lost his eye, and that's how he got into the work, because he thought it was so interesting, the idea of learning to paint and create his own false eye. Eva gets home from the eye doctor and complains about how stupid the TV show Kevin and his dad are watching, the fakeness of American culture. Quote, our son, however, could read all of the above and more into my disdain pronunciation of bonding. Is there anything or anybody, he asked, looking me in the eye, that you don't feel superior to? I've been candid with you about my problems with this country, I said stiffly, leaving little doubt with that candor that our source of regret and making perhaps my sole allusion since to our disastrous dinner at Hudson House. But I don't know what else gave you the idea that I feel superior. Ever notice that you never talk about the Americans as we, he said? It's always they, like you talk about the Chinese or something. I spent a large amount of my adulthood in other countries, and probably, yeah. I just want to know what makes you think that you're so special. She goes on dragging the unnecessary American tragedy of school shootings, saying that nobody needs gun, and Franklin is like, oh my gosh, not this again, shut up. American guns are American birthrights. Guns are part of our culture. Not everybody is shooting up a school. Why are you going on this rant again? She details the different things that created warning signs in some of the cases, because after what was happening in 1998, a lot of schools were becoming hyper responsive to students and actually over responsive. If you think of like the satanic panic, it was that level of over response where every little thing in school was seen as a possible red flag of these kids are going to damage people. Quote, now, as they go, this story was rich. It's morally agreeably clear. Little Kipling had bristled with warning signs that hadn't been taken with sufficient seriousness. In middle school, he'd been voted most likely to start World War III. He had recently given a class presentation on how to construct a bomb. In the main, he was predisposed to vent violent inclinations through the most innocuous of schoolworks. If the assignment was to write about what he might do in a garden, one student said, Kipling would write about mowing down the gardeners. Though, in an eerie coincidence, Kip Kinkle's initials were also KK. He was also so universally disliked by his schoolmates that even after his performance in the cafeteria, they refused to give him a nickname. Most damningly of all, the very day before the shooting, he had been arrested in possession of a stolen firearm, only to be released into his parents' custody. So the word went out. Dangerous students give themselves away. They can be spotted, ergo they can be stopped. This is the prerequisite to what became the hypervigilant behaviors, because you see people with these things that in hindsight they go, it's all obvious. But if you looked at it at the time, it might not have been. Like, who hasn't done kind of a risque thing in schoolwork? I can say one of the things that I didn't that I just got to create a crime and I just got to do a crime. And then people will be like, saw that coming. All the signs were there. You got the Jeffrey Dahmer action figures. You've got the Jeffrey Dahmer inspired story. You got she in her homework. Look at all the murders in her stories. Look at her attitude in her stories. Look at Casey. Casey is obviously a sign of danger incoming because he just smashes some guy's face in a church. And then you've got like go to undergraduate school, I had to take an anthropology class. And every week in the anthropology class, we had a practicum. We had the pages that we had to talk about what was in the pages that we read. We had a side project, and there was another thing. And one of the practicums was like, okay, so Alaska, because I was going to school in Alaska at the time. Alaska has been cut off from the rest of the lower 48, and now you have to supply your own food. What are your plans? And part of my emergency plan had to do with eating people if it got that serious. It was a joke. Okay. But I did put that in schoolwork. Who has not done a ridiculousness in schoolwork? Tell me right now, who is not? We all have questionable searches if we're artists here. We look up stuff all the time. Anyway, the hypersensitivity is described in part as this, quote, it was the same all over the country. If the embarrassing title squibs in New York Times sidebars were anything to go by. In Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a 14-year-old girl was strip searched, Franklin, and suspended when in a class discussion about school shootings, she said that she could see how kids who'd been teased might eventually snap. In Ponchatoula, Louisiana, a 12-year-old boy was locked up in juvenile detention for an entire 2 weeks because his warning to his fellow fifth graders in the cafeteria line that he'd get them if they didn't leave him enough potatoes was construed as a terrorist threat. On a 2-page website, BuffyTheVampireSlayer.com, an Indiana student posited a theory that must be crossed many of a high schooler's minds from time to time that his teachers were devil worshippers. Unsatisfied with the mere suspension, his teachers filed a federal lawsuit charging both the boy and his mother with defamation and infliction of emotional distress. A 13-year-old was suspended for 2 weeks because on a field trip to Albuquerque Atomic Museum, he had piped up, "Are they going to teach us how to build a bomb?" While another boy got the 3rd degree from a school administrator just for carrying a chemistry book. Nationwide, kids were expelled for wearing trench coats like Kipling Kinkle or just for wearing black. And my personal favorite was the 9-year-old suspension after a class project about diversity in Asian culture, during which he wrote to the fortune cookie message, "You will die an honorable death." I mean, this makes me think of, so I also recently finished the book, The Gift of Fear. And one of the things in there is it goes, well, if you look at the things, you can always see the thing coming. And while it's true, you can follow hints because things can tell you that something is going to happen. Often you can see it in hindsight. It's easier to see in hindsight because also a lot of behaviors don't actually cross into action. Again, you've got so many people who really, really love true crime, that obsess with true crime, that even do the romantic fan fiction of serial killers that don't actually have plans to ever do anything like that. You see a lot of people write torture fiction or angst fiction that has to do with emotional torture, physical torture, sexual torture, and they never plan to do that in real life. You have a lot of people that have questionable searches online or questionable entrances or certain types of kinks, and it never crosses into criminality. It's only after stuff, it's only things afterwards that people go, it's a sign. And it's the same thing that happened with the Satanic Panic, where sometimes people were like, oh, somebody killed somebody. What music did they listen to? Judas Priest. Clearly, it was a sign. And it's like, if somebody does something bad, then afterwards it feels like, oh, look at all these things. And there are times and places, I'm not saying it's impossible to follow the things to prevent crime, but I'm also saying in hindsight, it always seems more obvious than it did beforehand, because I also think that one, we don't have that same collection, that same attention to detail as we do until after the fact, because now we're looking for answers. Before, it was piecemeal, just interactions with that person. Secondly, I think that we also have a bias or a predisposition to assume better of people, because things like this or things like serial killings are so rare that it's very unlikely that it's going to happen. So our immediate jump is not to that. It's kind of an appeal to normalcy in a way. But let me know what you think on that in the comments down below. In an exchange between Eva and Kevin about one of the teachers, it exposes a relationship between Eva and Kevin that understands Kevin's communication style. And this teacher is actually one that Kevin will later bring into the auditorium and execute with the other classmates that he ends up killing. But it does show, one, the same sort of communication style that actually helps Eva start communicating with Kevin over time, as we'll see as we get to the end of this book. But that he wasn't non-understandable. It's just he had to talk in a certain way, and you had to talk in a certain way to get to his level. Quote, and he rebels by doing everything he's supposed to do. It's very clever. But I look into his eyes, and he's raging. Why? Well, he wasn't too happy when his sister was born, but that was over 7 years ago, and he wasn't too happy before she was born either. My delivery had grown morose. We're pretty well off, you know. We have a big house. I introduced the air of embarrassment. We try not to spoil him, but he lacks for nothing. Kevin's father adores him, almost too much. His sister did have an accident last winter in which Kevin was involved, but he didn't seem very bothered by it. Not bothered enough, in fact. Otherwise, I couldn't tell you the very terrible trauma that he's been through or deprivation that he suffered. We lead a very good life, don't we? Maybe that's what he's angry about. Why would affluence make him mad? Maybe he's mad that this is as good as it gets. Your big house, he's good at school. I think it's very difficult for kid these days in a way. The country's a very prosperity has become a burden, a dead end. Everything works, doesn't it? At least if you're white and middle class. So it must often seem to young people that they're not needed. In a sense, it's as if there's nothing more to do, except tear it apart. Yes, and you see the same cycles in history. It's not only children. You know, I've tried to tell my kids about the hardships of life in other countries like Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, but it's not their hardship, and I can't exactly tuck them into a bed of nails every night so that they'll appreciate the miracle of comfort. You said that your husband adores Kevin. How do you get along with him? I fold my arms. He's a teenager. Wisely, she dropped the subject. Your son is anything but a hopeless case. That's what I most wanted to tell you. He's sharp as a tack. Some of his papers, did you read the one of the SUVs? It was worthy of Swift, and I've noticed that he asks challenging questions merely to catch me out, to humiliate me in front of the class. In fact, he knows the answer beforehand, so I've been playing along. I call on him, and he asks what logomachy means. I'll gladly admit I don't, and bingo, he's learned a new word, because he had to go and find it in a dictionary to ask the question. It's a game that we play. He spurns learning through regular channels. But if you get at him through the back door, your young man has a spark. I was jealous. Generally, when I knock at that door, it's locked. Please don't despair. I assume that with you, just as in school, he's inaccessible and sarcastic. As you said, he's a teenager, but he's also inhaling information at a ferocious rate, if only because he's determined that nobody get the better of him. There was also a moment earlier that insinuated one of Kevin's female classmates was sexually abusing him. And when his dad asked for more information, Eva was in the room and he said that he wanted Eva to leave and he would only tell dad. Meanwhile, Eva was like, I don't believe you. And if I'm going to be asked to believe your claims of sexual impropriety from one of your teachers, then I better freaking hear you tell the story of what happened. But she was asked to leave, and Franklin was told privately. And then Franklin came out fuming, saying, I can't believe this happened. We're going to report this. When it comes to that, then Eva asks this teacher as well about that teacher and asks if the rumors are true. This teacher says, I don't think that's been established what's going on, but I'm also friends of that teacher, so I don't think that I can talk on this and be impartial. I'm sorry, but I can't really comment on this. However, it is a painful time for her. This sets up for what will be a meeting with the accused teacher, other teachers, another person who said they were a victim, Kevin's family, and then they're going to talk about the experiences, both from Kevin's perspective and from the teacher's perspective. And then you get Lenny's perspective. And then they're like, Lenny made you look like a liar, Kevin, because his story is so over the top. But I'm going to show you Kevin's experiences as he describes it next to how the teacher describes it. And you can make up your own mind on how you feel about this situation. Quote, so I waited around till 4 o'clock since she said that she had stuff to do right after the bell, and by then there wasn't hardly anybody around anymore. I walked into her classroom and I thought that it was kind of strange that she'd changed clothes since our 4th period class. I mean, just the shirt, but now it was one of those scratchy tees that are scooped low and that cling enough that you could see her, her what? Her nipples, Kevin said. So I said, you want me to go through my monologue? And she got up and closed the door and she locked it and she said, we need a little privacy, don't we? And I said, I actually didn't mind the air. Then I asked, should I start at the top? And she said, first, we've got to work on that posture of yours. And she said, I've got to learn to speak the language from my diaphragm right here. And she put her hand on my chest and then left it there. And then she said, you got to stand up real straight. And she put her other hand on my lower back and pressed and sort of smoothed it around. I'm sure I did stand up straight. I remember holding my breath since I was nervous. And then I started my monologue from Equa. Actually, I'd wanted to do Shakespeare, that to be or not to be thing. I thought it'd be kind of cool. In your own good time, son. But what happened next? I think she interrupted me after the first 2 or 3 lines, and she said, you have to remember that this play is all about sex. When he binds those horses, it's an erotic act. And then she started asking if I'd ever seen horses, big horses up close. Not like geldings, but stallions. And had I ever noticed how big? I'm sorry. Do you want me to say what she really said? Or should I just, summarize? It would be better if you use the exact words as well as you can remember. Okay, but you asked for it. Kevin inhaled. She wanted to know if I'd ever seen a horse's cock, how big it was. And all of this time, I'm kind of feeling funny, like restless. And then she put her hand on my fly, my jeans. And I was pretty embarrassed because with all of that talk, I got a little worked up. You mean you had an erection, said Strickland sternly. Look, do I have to go on? Kevin appealed. If you can, it would be better if you finished the story. Kevin glanced at the ceiling and crossed his legs tightly, tapping his toe of his right sneaker in an agitated, irregular rhythm against the toe of his left. So I said, Mrs. Pogorsky, maybe we should work on this scene some other time, because I gotta get going. I wasn't sure whether to say anything about her hand, so I just kind of kept saying that maybe we should stop, and I wanted to stop, and that I should go now, because it didn't seem right, and I like her, but not like that, and you could see, she could be my mother or something. Let's be clear here, Mr. Strickland said. Legally, it's only important because you're a minor, but on top of that, you're only 15, and they were unwanted advances, correct? Well, yeah, she's ugly. Gorski flinched. It was the brief, floppy little jerk that you get when you're shooting a small animal with a high-caliber pistol and it's already dead. So, did she stop? Said Strickland. No. She started rubbing up and down through my jeans, and And so all the while saying Jesus, saying, and I really apologize, Mr. Strickland, but you asked. She said that every time she saw a horse's cock, she wanted to suck it, and that's when I ejaculated. Kevin dropped his head into his lap. Yeah, it was kind of a mess, and I just ran out. I skipped class a couple of times after that, but then I came back, and I tried to act as if nothing happened since I didn't want to wreck my grade point average. So that was Kevin's version of the story. This is the teacher's version of the story. Quote, Strickland turned to the drama teacher's chair as he kept his distance. Miss Pogorsky, it's your contention that this encounter never happened. That's... She cleared her throat. That's right. Do you have any idea why Kevin would tell such a story if it wasn't true? No, I don't. I couldn't understand. Kevin's class is an unusually talented group, and I thought that we'd been having a lot of fun. I'd given him plenty of individual attention. It's the individual attention that he seems to have the problem with. I give all of my students individual attention. Oh, Miss Pogorsky, let's hope not, Strickland said sorrowfully. Our small audience chuckled. Now, you claim that you didn't invite Kevin to stay after school. Not separately. I told the whole class that if they wanted to use the classroom for practicing their scenes after school, that I'd make it available. So you did invite Kevin to stay after school, then? As Pogorsky sputtered, Strickland proceeded. Have you ever admired Kevin's looks? I may have said something about his having very striking features, yes. I tried to instill confidence in my students. How about this speaking from the diaphragm? Did you say that? Well, yes. And have you put your hands on his chest to indicate where the diaphragm is? Maybe, but I never touched him on on his lower back when improving his posture. Possibly. He has a tendency to slump and it ruins his... What about the selections from Equus? Did Kevin choose that passage? I recommended it. Why not something from Our Town or Neil Simon and a little less racy? I try to find plays that students can relate to about things that are important to them. Things like sex. Well, yes, among other things, of course. She was getting flustered. Did you describe the contents of the play as erotic? Maybe, probably yes. I thought that drama about adolescent sexuality and its confusion would naturally appeal. Miss Pogorsky, are you interested in adolescent sexuality? Well, who isn't? She cried. Someone should have given the poor woman a shovel, so intent was she on digging her own grave. But Equus isn't steamy and explicit. It's all symbolism. Symbolism you are eager to explain. And did you talk about horses to Kevin? Of course, the play. Did you talk about stallions, Miss Pogorsky? Well, we did discuss what made them such common symbols of virality, and what does make them virile. Well, they're muscular and very beautiful and powerful and sleek, just like teenage boys. Strickland noted sardonically. Did you ever draw attention to the horse's penis, to its size? Maybe. How could you ignore it? But I never said... Some people can't ignore it, apparently. You don't understand. These are young people, and they are easily bored. I have to do something to get them excited. Strickland just let that one sit there for a beat. Yes, well, you seem to have succeeded there. Deathly pale, Pogorsky turned to our son. What did I ever do to you? So... that's up for you to determine. This kind of made me think of the situation with Mr. Strain and My Dark Vanessa, where he also was saying very specific things in class that were evocative, that were like saying fuck, that were being sexual descriptions, that were, hey, let's read this story and look at it from a sexual perspective specifically. Like he was leading these students in that specific direction and then waiting to see what reactions they had in order to find which person would be his victim, right? And so then I look at this and the way that she is talking here, and it could be the same game. The difference is the perspective on this and whether you trust Kevin, whether you trust the teacher or Eva, whether you think that this is appropriate either way, because you still have this teacher admitting to being interested in teen sexuality, in talking to these teens about sex, in talking to these teens about horsecock, in touching these teens. And there is a line. So where is the line? And that's often a subject that comes up also when talking about the ALA books that never really seems to be discussed. Did this teacher cross a line? And if this teacher crossed the line, how do you tell that difference from the teachers like Mr. Strain that also say things and then use those things to go forward on the students. I also read or heard, I can't remember what it was. You're right. The guidelines in place are not going to stop bad people that do want to do something, but they are going to stop the lazy criminal. I think that was actually in The Gift of Fear. And so saying, hey, maybe don't talk to your 14-year-old student, 15-year-old student about horsecock and give them an erotic play of symbolism sex as their monologue. Maybe don't do that. I don't know. This is a complicated conversation, but let me know what you think, because also the fact that it's Kevin and some people might have bad feelings about Kevin already may guide your feelings on this situation and whether or not you want to say if Mrs. Pogorski crossed the line. But that's an interesting question. Afterwards, Kevin's friend testifies, and he's much more dramatic and much more brash in his language. And saying, of course, he took advantage of the teacher when the teacher said that she would sleep with him, because who doesn't want to sleep with an older woman? And then they get outside the car, and Franklin is like, your friend made people think that you're a liar because your friend's testimony was such bullshit, bro. And when they get home, Kevin and Eva argue about this, with Eva saying clearly Kevin is lying. He wasn't sexually abused by this woman. And Franklin is like, are you seriously saying that you're not going to believe your son, that your son was not sexually abused? And so then Kevin actually hears this argument between the two of them that actually results in Franklin saying, I can't do this anymore. If you're going to treat your son like this, I thought that we could at least stick it out until they were done with school. But if you're going to treat your son like this, I don't think we can. I think that we should break up. We should find a way. We can hold it out until summer. And then when they're on summer break, we can figure out how to divorce, because we can't just keep going on like this. And then Kevin actually heard this entire discussion or argument, which was about him and the divorce being caused by him. And he shows a lot of depression in response to this. Not only that, but Eva also says that if Celia had come to her saying that she was being abused, then she would believe Celia. But it's the fact that it is Kevin that she does not freaking believe. Because they don't have any evidence, like physical evidence of the impropriety from that teacher, they can't fire her or anything, so they move her to administrative duties. And it is after all of this that Kevin asks if he can have some Prozac because he is depressed. In regards to his depression, Eva doesn't really like pharmaceutical companies are just throwing around drugs at anyone and everyone who asks of them, but she's not going to freaking argue with what they do with Kevin. She's like, whatever, have them. And also, good for you. I bet you're glad that we're getting divorced. Don't look so depressed. Quote, most children are mortified by the prospect of their parents' divorce, and I don't deny that conversation he overheard from the hallway sent Kevin into a tailspin. Nevertheless, I was disconcerted. That boy had been trying to split us up for 15 years. Why wasn't he satisfied? And if I really was such a whore, why wouldn't he gladly jettison his awful mother? In retrospect, I can only assume that it was bad enough living with a woman who was cold, suspicious, resentful, accusatory, and aloof. Only one eventuality must have seemed worse than that which was living with you, Franklin, getting stuck with the dad. Getting stuck with the dad of the dupe. So he's obviously showing signs of distress, that he doesn't like that his parents were getting divorced. And also that sounds like getting divorced about him. And she's like, he's faking it. Like, he hates me. He's faking it. I can't believe that he freaking has feelings for me. And it's like, I think your son has issues. I also think most people generally want their parent. In the same way that parents generally do want to care for their kids. And then you have the odd ones every so often that have this disassociation. But I think Kevin does and has wanted his mother's attention, but the way that his mother acts just pushes him away, and it doesn't work with who he is. And she never tries to talk to him. It's just mocking. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't want her and he doesn't want it to work out. And I think it shows through their changing relationship. But I also see in this moment, this was a trigger for him because he's 15. The shooting is going to happen very soon here. But it is this on top of it all. And there's always a trigger moment. If you study psychology, there's always a trigger moment for when that psychological point snaps and it becomes an action from the mind. And I think that this was it. And it's still so incredible to me that she can't believe anything that Kevin says. Any of Kevin's feelings are real. She has such a bias against him. There's also a point in here where Eva says that she wishes her children were never born. Like, she loves Celia. She doesn't like Kevin. But since Celia was the second one, then she would have to just not have Kevin, which would mean not having Celia. And she says, I wish I never had my kids because they're making me a cuckold in my own marriage. That's how she thinks of her children. She also says that she cannot cry over her marriage because she feels like it ended a long time ago. She thought she was going to have more tears, but now that it's finally come to this head, she's like, it's not that big a deal. Now we've got Kevin finally being on television doing an interview with Mr. Malin, and he is asked if the medicine is what made him do what he did. And he says no. He is asked if it was the relationship with his father, how the relationship with his parents was, and what may have caused it. He says, what? Quote, Mr. Plastic? I'd be so lucky if we have a fight. No, it was all cheery, chippy hot dogs and cheese whiz. A total fraud, you know? All like, let's go to Natural History Museum, Kev, and you have all these real neato rocks. He was into some Little League fantasy, stuck in the 1950s. I get this, I love ya, buddy stuff. And I just look at him like, who are you talking to, guy? What does it mean that your dad loves you and hasn't a fucking clue who you are? What's he love then? Some kid in Happy Days, not me. So that expresses, if it's true, and if that is true, vulnerability from Kevin, because you also have to think he's on TV. Is he being honest? But if it does, then that shows a vulnerability of him feeling like he was never seen by his father. Then he is asking about his mother. Quote, well, there was that civil suit brought for parental negligence. Totally bogus, said Kevin flatly. Rank opportunism, frankly. More culture of compensation. Next thing you know, geezers will be suing the government for getting old, and kids will be taking their mommies to court because they came out ugly. My views run, life sucks, tough luck. Fact is, the lawyers knew Mumsy had deep pockets and that Wolford Cow can't take bad news on the chin. Just then, the camera angle panned 90 degrees, zooming in on the room's only decoration that I could see that is taped over his bed. Badly creased from having been folded, a small enough to fit in a pocket or a wallet, it was a photograph of me. Jesus Christ, it was that headshot from the Amsterdam boathouse which disappeared when Celia was born. I was sure that he'd torn it to pieces. But whether or not your mother was legally remiss, Marlin proceeds, maybe she paid you too little attention. Oh, lay off my mother. The sharp, menacing voice was alien to me, but it must have been useful inside. Shrinks here spend all day trying to get me to trash the woman, and I'm getting a little tired of it. If you want to know the truth. And I'm getting a little tired of it if you want to know the truth. Marlin regrouped. Would you describe your relationship as close then? She's been all over the world. You know that? You can hardly name a country where she hasn't gotten a t-shirt. Started her own company. Go into the bookstores around here and you'll see her series. You know, smelly foreign dumps on the wing and a prayer. I used to cruise into Barnes & Noble in the malls just to get a glimpse of all of her books. It's pretty cool. So you don't think that she in any way might have... Look, I could be kind of a creep, okay? And maybe she can be kind of a creep too, so we're even. Otherwise, it's private, okay? So, there's no such thing in this country anymore as private. Or do I have to tell you the color of my underwear? Next question. Which, his answers right here actually very much echo some of the things that Eva has said, where she's like, I'm nothing like my son, this son is nothing like me. He actually absorbed a hell of a lot of her. So then they ask him why he did it. He says, okay, quote, it's like this. You wake up, you watch TV, you get in the car and you listen to the radio. You go to do your little job at your little school, and you're not going to hear about it on the 6 o'clock news since guess what? Nothing is really happening. You read the paper, or if you go into the sort of thing, you read a book, which is just the same as watching, only it's even more boring. You watch TV all night, or maybe you go out so that you can watch a movie, or maybe you'll get a phone call so that you can tell your friends what you've been watching. And, you know, it's got so bad that I've started to notice the people on TV, inside the TV, half of the time, they're also watching TV. And if you've got some romance in a movie, what do they go and do but go to a movie? All of these people, Marlin, what are they watching? An awkward silence. Marlin fills in. You tell us, Kevin. People like me. Marlin would have been happy with his footage, and he wasn't about to let the show stop now. Kevin was on a roll, and he had that quality of just getting started. But people watch other things than killers, Kevin. Horse shit. Kevin said. They want to watch something happen, and I've made a study of it. Pretty much the definition of something happening is it's bad. The way I see it, the world is divided into the watchers and the watchees, and there is more and more of the audience and less to see. People who actually do anything are goddamn endangered species. He says that he's better than Columbine, and they were copycats trying to one-up him, but they were actually worse because their victims were random while his were very specific. He also goes on to say, quote, "My story is about all that I got to my name right now, and that's why I'm feeling robbed. But a story is a whole lot more than most people got. All you people are out there doing is watching. You're listening to what I say because I've something that you don't. I got a plot, bought and paid for. That's all that you people want, and why you're sucking off me. You want my plot. I know how you feel too, since hey, I used to feel the same way. TV and radio, video games and movies and computer screens. On April 8th, 1999, I jumped into the screen. I switched to watchee. Ever since, I've known what my life is about. I give a good story. It may have been kind of gory, but I admit it. It may have been kind of gory, but admit it. You all loved it. You ate it up. Nuts. I ought to be on some government payroll. Without people like me, the whole country would jump off a bridge because the only thing on TV is some housewife who wants to be a millionaire winning $64,000 for remembering the name of the president's dog." Maybe some of the points here is that Kevin is not going to be honest on television, which is true because you're actually going to get a moment of his mother asking him why, and he's going to give an answer that is very different than this. He is still performing for people. But he is also very clearly angry. He also did not get something that he needed and is desiring still in the state. And if you even believe that somebody might have guilt or might have remorse or might think about their actions, then that can be hitting him too. And in some cases, and I might talk about this at the end as well, when you've got a mass crime, a lot of people generally want to think that there is no turning back, that there was not and will not and never will be any remorse. And in cases like this too, people forget that it's a teenager. That what are teenager emotions? Teenagers are often also drawn to the emotional music that highly express things, as those emotional diaries are often fairly common among teenagers who are kind of lost. And so it often doesn't turn into like what Kevin has turned into, but Kevin's emotional outburst is also not that uncommon for teenagers outside of the, taking it to actual violence. But the feelings of alienation and isolation and not being loved, those are all common teenager feelings. Quote, "Still, I reluctantly have to admit that his post hoc exegesis contained a nugget of truth. Were NBC to broadcast an unabating string of documentaries on the mating habits of sea otters, viewers worldwide dwindled. Listening to Kevin's diatribe, I was struck, despite myself, by what a sizable portion of our species feeds off the depravity of a handful of retrobates, if not to earn a living, then to pass the time. It isn't only journalists either, think tanks generating mountains of papers over the sovereign disposition of factions a little East Timor, university conflict study departments issuing countless PhDs on ETA terrorists who number no more than 100, filmmakers generating millions by dramatizing the predations of lone serial killers. And think of it, the court, police, National Guard, how much of the government is the management of the wayward 1%, with prisons building and warding one of the biggest growth industries in the United States, a sudden popular conversion to civilization across the board could trigger a recession. Since I myself had craved a turn of the page, is it really such a stretch to say that that we need him? Beneath his Bathic disguise, Jack Marlin had sounded grateful. He wasn't interested in the mating habits of sea otters, and he was grateful. Otherwise, Franklin, my reaction to the interview is very confusing, a customary horror mix with something like pride. He was lucid, self-assured, engaging. I was touched by that photograph over his bed, and no little chagrined that he hadn't destroyed it after all. I guess I've always assumed the worst. Recognizing snippets of his soliloquy from my own triads at the table, I'm not only mortified, but flattered, and I'm thunderstruck that he has ever ventured into Barnes & Noble to gaze at my handiwork, for which is Meet My Mother essay didn't betray great respect, but I'm dismayed by his unkind remarks about you, which I hope that you don't take to heart. You tried so hard to be attentive, affectionate father, yet I did warn you that children are unusually alert to artifice, so it makes sense that to your very effort that he derides, and you can understand why, in relation to you, all people, he feels compelled to portray himself as a victim. So even in this, like, she's now recognizing that Kevin was actually listening to her for real, absorbing her, learning from her, appreciating her, and wasn't dishonest in everything that he said that she thought that he was dishonest in. She thinks about the signs that she was asked about with Kevin, and she says that they were hard to see. Like, yeah, at some point, Kevin played nicer than he normally was. His sarcasm was turned down. He got up early. He piled the stuff that he needed responsibly over time, so nobody really noticed, and he prepared to do his attack. Now, the difference in time between the time of the attack and the parents divorcing, I'm not entirely clear on, since I don't think it gives a date for those things, but I do think it matters. But things actually settled down for a bit, to a point that they actually had a good Christmas. They exchanged gifts, and Eva actually thought that maybe the divorce wouldn't happen in the summer, because her and Franklin were even having sex and enjoying each other's company again. Eva then thinks about Kevin's reasoning and what he did. Quote, "Nevertheless, I'm convinced that his leading motivation was ideological. Not that I got a plan nonsense he fobbed off on Jack Marlin. Rather, I have in mind the purity he admired in the computer viruses. Having registered the social compulsion to derive such broad, trenchant lesson from every asinine murder spree, he must have painstakingly parsed the prospective fallout from his own. His father, at least, was forever dragging him off to some cluttered Native American museum or dreary Revolutionary War battlefield, so that anyone who tried to portray him as neglected victim of the self-centered two-career marriage would have an uphill battle. And whatever may have intuited, we were not divorced, no copy here. There wasn't a member of a satanic cult. Most of his friends didn't go to church either, so godlessness was unlikely to emerge as a cautionary theme. He wasn't picked on. He had his unsavory friends, and his contemporaries went out of their way to leave him be. So the poor prosecuted misfit, we must do something to stop bullying in school number, wouldn't go very far. Unlike the mental incontinence that he held in such contempt, who passed malignant notes in class and made the extravagant promises to a confidant, he'd kept his mouth shut. He hadn't posted a homicidal website or written essays about blowing up schools, and the most creative social commentary would be hard-pressed to deploy a satire about sports utility vehicles as one of those unmissable warning signs that are now meant to drive vigilant parents and teachers to call confidential hotlines. But best of all, if he accomplished his stunt entirely with a mere crossbow, his mother and all of the mush-headed liberal friends wouldn't be able to parade him before Congress as one more poster boy for gun control. In short, his choice of weapon was meant to ensure to the best of his abilities that Thursday meant absolutely nothing. She still doesn't see at this point what her behaviors, the way that she treated him, the way that she thought he was evil from the beginning and through him. She doesn't even acknowledge that the physical treatment that she gave him did this, had an effect on him, or that she always thought he was lying, that she never believed it when he was ill, that she never believed it if he reported something, that she always blamed him if something went wrong. She doesn't see that her behavior may have affected him, even though she sees other areas where things that she said are being repeated by him and he has internalized her thought processes. She doesn't see the other effects. Eva is then thinking over the morning of the shooting, where everything went over really nicely. He got up early. He said, "Hey, do you want to say goodbye to Celia one more time?" Because he knew what was going to happen. It could be your last. And then things went down. His dad started talking to him about a camera and taking shots that Kevin eventually just blew up at him and was like, "I don't want to talk about the stupid camera. I don't care. Get out of my face." And Eva judges him for hurting Dad's feelings and is like, "I'm sorry that he hurt your feelings." So then she goes to work, and then she hears about something going down at Gladstone, and then she thinks, oh no, something is going to happen to Kevin, but she never could have thought that he was going to be the perpetrator. As she's running to the school, she's thinking of all of these things she's thinking of many of these things that have contributed over the years. Quote, as we follow me running down to the garage to my VW, gunning out of Midtown, only to get stuck on the West Side Highway, let's get one thing straight. I did think Kevin screamed in his crib out of free-floating rage, and not because he needed feeding. I fiercely believed that when he poked fun at our waitress's poopy face, he knew that he would hurt her feelings. And he defaced the maps on my study walls out of a calculated malice, not misguided creativity. I was still convinced that he systematically seduced Violetta into clawing a layer of skin off of the better part of her body, and that he continued to require diapers until he was 6 years of age, not because he was traumatized or confused, or slow to develop, but because he was on a full-time war footing with his mother. I thought that destroying the toys and storybooks I painstakingly fashioned because they were worth more to him as emblems of his own up-yours ingratitude than of the sentimental playthings, and I was sure that he learned to count and read in secret deliberately to deprive me of any sense of usefulness as a parent. My certainty that he was the one who flipped the quick release on the front wheel of Trent Corley's bicycle was unwavering. I was under no illusion that the nest of bagworms who had dropped into Celia's backpack by itself, or that she climbed into a tree 20 feet up of white oak only to get stranded on an upper branch all by her lonesome. I believed that it was no more her idea to stir together a lunch of petroleum jelly and Thai curry paste than it was to play kidnapping and Willem Tell. I was pretty damn sure that whatever Kevin whispered in the ear of let us call her Alice at the 8th grade school dance, it wasn't admiration of her dress, and however liquid Plumer got in Celia's left eye, I was dead positive that her brother had something to do with it beyond the role of her noble savior. I regarded his jerking off at the home with the door wide open as wanton sexual abuse of his mother and not the normal uncontrollable bubbling of adolescent hormones. Although I may have told Mary that Laura should suck it up, I found it entirely credible that our son had told her frail, undeferred daughter that she was fat. It was no mystery to me how a hit list turned up in Miguel Espinaz's locker. And though I took full responsibility for spreading one to my own company, I couldn't see the hobby of collecting computer viruses as anything but disturbing and degenerate. I remain firmly of the view that Vicky Pogorski has been prosecuted in a show trial of Kevin Kachadorian's personal contrivances. Granted, I'd been mistaken about our son's responsibility for chucking chunks of bricks on an oncoming cars on 9W, and until 10 days ago I had chalked up the disappearance of a treasured photograph from Amsterdam as yet another victim of my son's unparalleled spite. So I have, as I said, always believed the worst. But even my unnatural maternal cynicism had its limits. When Rose told me that there was a vicious assault at Kevin's high school and some students had feared dead, I worried for his well-being. Not for an instant did I imagine that our son would be the perpetrator. So she gets there, and it goes through a retelling of how he set up and the entire killing. He brought them all to the gym that he had previously cleaned out with this call that they were all going to get an award. He specifically sent it to certain people, said to keep it a secret, locked all the doors with bike locks, climbed into the rafters, started shooting them with his crossbow, and then as this is happening, and once or after it's happened and he's being walked away, and Eva is trying to get a hold of Franklin and keeps calling his phone, and she's like, why did he have to work late today? Why isn't he answering his phone? Gosh, I hate this guy. Why is he not doing what he is supposed to be doing? She gets home, all the lights are off. She goes looking around the house for Franklin, for Celia, doesn't find them until she gets to the back door, where she goes outside and finds that both Franklin and Celia were executed by Kevin earlier that morning before he went to school and were still laying out in the yard. In the final chapter of this book, Eva is allowed to visit Kevin on his 18th birthday. Now, there's one instance where he mentions and he pulls out Celia's eyeball, which he actually kept with him in a little chest as something that he had at this institute. And he kind of pulls it out in front of his mom. And his mom is like, don't do that. Don't show me that. I don't ever want to fucking see it. And so then she needs to bring this up because later, 3 days on the anniversary of his shooting and on the 2-year anniversary of the shooting, and 3 days before he turns 18, where he's going to be transferred to the adult prison where he will be for 5 years until he is released. I'm assuming he got such a light sentence because he was a minor when the thing happened. He provides her with the little box and says, I have this gift for you, and then says, I would like you to take this eye, maybe bury it because if I take it into prison, it'll likely be stolen from me and then used in some prank, and I don't think that it should be used in that way. She also notices that he is in a prison jumper, the orange kind, so he's no longer in clothes that look too small on him, making him look bigger, but actually it's making him look like a little boy because he's in oversized clothing. After she receives the eye from Kevin, without any jokes, without any sardonicness, she asks, "Why did you do this? Why did you take my family away from me?" And he responds saying, "I don't know." And Eva's actually satisfied with this because it doesn't feel fake. It doesn't feel like he's trying to get her. For her, it feels like this is really his answer, is he doesn't understand why he did what he did, or he doesn't understand himself. And that's also a fair assessment because he's 15. Well, he's 18 now, but he's 15. He was 15 at the time. And again, think of any other thing. Take yourself out of the criminal enterprise, the criminal actions of what happened here. How many 15-year-olds, 14-year-olds can really, really explain to you why they do what they do, why they feel what they feel, how they are responding? And I don't think it's that many. And I think it's very common in situations, especially where criminal actions happen, where victims happen. It's very easy to forget that you're still dealing with a teenager, with the emotional development of a teenager, with the thoughts of a teenager that are often over-exaggerated. That's what sells in YA. It's because of the over-exaggeration, the super emotion. It's only when it's turned into a criminal enterprise or a criminal action that creates victims that it's often forgotten that this is still a teenager. And I understand the emotional response to that, but again, we're looking at the psychology of it, not the legal side of it, and not the morality of it. We're just looking at the behaviors. And it's very easy to forget teenagers. But then also, it goes into the weird situation. I should hold on to that because how responsible, how knowledgeable are teenagers? We'll get into that after the end of the synopsis a little bit. So to start that conversation, because there's just a little bit more to this. We're finally at the end, and Eva thinks about the way that she was treated in court. Because of her appearance, she was called cold and uncaring. Even her in-laws called her a failure of a mother, and it was her trying to keep it together, her trying to process everything that was also taken from her, because she did lose her husband, her daughter, and her son that day, even if her son is alive. But she also is likely realizing that she has not had her son for 16, 18 years because of whatever their relationship has been. Before Eva leaves, Kevin says that he is sorry, and Eva says, "I'm sorry too." And at the end, we get this quote, "In any event, by thrashing between exoneration and excoriation, I have only tired myself out. I don't know. At the end of the day, I have no idea. That pure, serene ignorance has become itself a funny kind of solace. The truth is, if I decided that I was innocent, or if I decided that I was guilty, what difference does it make? If I arrive at the right answer, would you come home? This is all I know, that on the 11th of April, 1983, unto me I was born a son, and I felt nothing. Once again, the truth is always larger than what we make it. As that infant squirmed in my breast, for which he shrank in such distaste, I spurned him in return. He may have been born the 15th of my size, but it seemed fair at the time. Since that moment, we have fought one another with an unrelenting ferocity that I can almost admire. But it must be possible to earn the devotion by testing an antagonism to its very limits, to bring people closer through the very act of pushing them away. Because after 3 days, short of his 18th year, I can finally announce that I am too exhausted and too confused and too lonely to keep fighting, and if only out of desperation or even laziness I love my son. He has 5 grim years left to serve in the adult penitentiary, and I cannot vouch for what will walk out on the other side. But in the meantime, there is a second bedroom in my serviceable apartment. The bedspread is plain, a copy of Robin Hood lies on the bookshelf, and the sheets are clean." That's the end. So, what are your thoughts on this? It's a great character study in general, but you also have to be kind of prepared for what you're getting into, because Eva's kind of a character. Well, some of my comments on this and the questions that I want to leave you guys with: great character voices from the very beginning. You get a very strong sense of who Eva is. Now, if you're not a fan of literary fiction or literary style fiction, you may not like this, because there is a lot a lot of description and a lot of words and a lot of the narrative is verbose. And so some of when I was sharing this with a reading group, they were not a fan of how many words because they were like waiting for things to happen. But this book is not one of those books that the things happen, that you're watching the things happen. It is a character exploration, which is different than a plot-driven story. This is a character-driven story. This is also a great example of not liking a character, but being super interested in seeing what is happening. Often in descriptions or discussions about books, there's the relatableness or the likableness of a main character, but a character doesn't have to be relatable or likable, the main character, if they are interesting enough to want to follow their perspective. Now, Eva's perspective and also even Kevin are not going to be interesting enough or the right kind of people to capture the attention of a lot of people because of the type of people that they are. But if it is the type of story that interests you, then it will. And obviously, I have a propensity for stories like this, so it captured my attention. There is also, throughout the story, especially early on, a clear struggle with losing identity when she loses her ability to travel, her home, and everything to motherhood and being the mother of Franklin's child, more so than being his wife, because she does complain about being a couple with him less. So it feels like she loses I'm no longer even your wife, we're not a couple, I'm just the mother. Also interesting that this author, one, doesn't have any children, admittedly, but in interviews almost also seems fearful of motherhood or to despise it or to question why people do it. It's also made clear that the author mixes fiction and journalism because that is their job outside of writing. And I feel like that you can see that in the way that certain things are reported in here. The author does a very good job of bringing in their voice of journalism, I think. And sometimes it can feel like it is being politically spouty, but that's also just part of life. So I don't think it actually got there. Like some of the things there at the end with Kevin in those interviews, I almost questioned if it was being a mouthpiecey, but Kevin was putting on a performance and he was copying his mom's performance. So some of the things that I could see him saying were because he'd heard his mom saying them and he was saying them on television. At least that's what I think. Something that I also sort of mentioned earlier in this video and maybe somewhere throughout, but I feel like in discussing this, I've noticed a bias against victims if there was harm caused by that victim to others. So like I said, if somebody is groomed as a young child to then be victimized, as a younger teenager or something sexually, they are considered a victim and they are not seen as responsible for their actions. They can't make those choices. They don't understand what they're doing. However, in a situation like Kevin's, when you're brought up in this negative environment, when you're brought up with these opinions, you do this thing that creates other victims and you are seen as entirely capable of being able to understand the reality of your situation. Now, I'm not talking in a legal sense. I just want to talk about the way that our behaviors affect and influence other people, the way that we see the world. I've seen in other conversations over the years and in videos that kind of detail things that have happened in the last 10, 15 years, where people do not believe that when you repeat things ad nauseum to somebody, if you're dogpiling and repeat, that they might actually develop a messed up version of themselves or reality because they're being bombarded with this information that can actually make you delusional or change how you see things. And instead of understanding that sometimes people's brains do short circuit or change based on a reaction to stuff that they're fed, it's all called fake. Now, sometimes it is fake. The fact that sometimes it's real and sometimes it's not real, and sometimes people do use opportunity to try to manipulate people as making themselves victims makes it harder to see real victims. But that doesn't mean that victims don't exist. But it's very difficult to actually converse in a situation with a victim who creates other victims because nobody wants to give that victim the benefit of the doubt, saying, I see how you got to where you are. That doesn't mean that they don't get to take account for their own actions. It just means that we recognize the things that contributed to their actions, which is also something that has come up in many of the conversations about this, even including conversations I've had in person where I mention this and they go, well, when does the person take responsibility for their own actions? Is nobody allowed to take responsibility for their own actions anymore? Because then we're starting to talk about the victimizer who, like Kevin, and it's nobody is saying that person is not responsible for their choices, but how are we looking at them being responsible for their choices and not looking at the parents or contributors or those around teenagers like this that then affect their view of the world that cause them to take action? Again, going back to the situation, what makes the difference between a 15-year-old girl who is brought up sexually and doesn't know what she's doing and is considered a grooming victim, and a 15-year-old boy who comes up in this situation, and this is how he sees everything is useless and he doesn't feel heard and all like, I understand that there is a lack of desire to understand somebody that hurts other people. It's a very big thing to ask. I get that. But just think about it. There is this inability to understand considering how your own actions affect others. And I've seen it a lot on people too that reject the idea of the legitimacy of psychology, where it's like, I can treat somebody however the frick I want. And when they break, it doesn't matter if I'm abusive, if I smack them around, if I do all of these things, if it's all this abuse, if they lash out, their fault, they chose to lash out. I have no culpability in it. The only time that I've seen this different is when somebody else can use someone else's lashing out to their advantage to say you're the bad guy. One of these things is like if somebody commits suicide and then they can go, oh, you caused them to commit suicide. You're the bad guy. I'm not the bad guy. You did the suicide on this guy that I didn't even like, but I can use him against you. That's the only time that I see it brought up. Otherwise, it's like, no, you chose. You did it. And so it's like, marketing is all about influencing. Peer pressure is all about influencing. You can't pretend that there is no effect on the surroundings, that people do not have influence on each other, on shaping what people think, on, I don't want to miss that, so I'm going to go and look at it. I feel like the influence of other people is very much there. And so in situations like this, it feels like there's sometimes a curiousness to why things are happening. It's just shutting the door. And I'm not asking anybody to care about things that they don't want to care about. We all have special interests, and that's why we all have specialties in which we go. Some people are going to go and do this specialty, some in that specialty. Some are never going to care about this. You know, the people that work in the nursery at church are not necessarily the same people working with outreach in other countries, because they are very different specialties. But there is what I have observed, and a curiousness, and the why did somebody do this? Why would somebody do this? And not even in the criminality sense. It's just like, why would somebody believe this? Instead, it becomes, no, you're going to believe what I believe. You're going to say what I say. And if you don't, then I'm going to bully you or call you stupid and get after you for that, because the only answers are I'm right, you're wrong. And so I got to prove you wrong if we disagree. Otherwise, because I'm not looking like the fool. That's how it constantly goes. The last thing that I want to say is, like, I don't understand how you could turn this into a movie and not make the audience bias against Kevin. It would be, and this is an evil child movie. I don't see how you could capture all of the nuance that is put inside of the narration of this book and get it in the movie. I'll probably watch the movie at some point when I have time, though it's not on my rush list because I don't think the movie can stand up to the book. The book is, I think it's a real work of art. This author did a great job of creating the situation, of providing this situation to be analyzed and bringing the reader in for the ride. So with that said, let me know what your thoughts are in the this is one of the reasons why I love books, especially love first person, because first person has that distinct biased perspective of the character, and a character is never going to tell you when they're being biased, because usually we don't really know. We just know what we know and what we see, and that's what I love about books. But with that said, let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Have you read We Need to Talk About Kevin? Will you read this book? Have you seen the movie? What are your thoughts? Looking forward to that, to the discussion topics and more. With that said, have a great weekend and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross.
Is he in trouble?
We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that? To the left. Plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry. flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?